Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the International, and Salam Hamagi, and welcome back to the International People's Tribunal on U.S. Imperialism, Sanctions, Blockades, and Economic Coercive Measures. We took about a month-long break for Ramadan, and so Eid Mubarak to those who celebrate, and welcome back to everybody. It's great to see our jurors' faces and to welcome our witnesses for today's hearing on Iran. So before we get started, I want to remind everybody that we actually, while we've been going on for a while, we have not even completed half of our hearings yet. So today we have Iran. In 2 weeks, we have a weekend-long hearing session. May 6th and 7th will be Eritrea. It'll be, I think, 2 to 3 hours a day, both Saturday and Sunday. Iraq will be May 13th. Yemen will be May 19th. Haiti is May 27th. Nicaragua is June 3rd, Cuba is June 10th, Ethiopia is June 18th, Hawaii is July 2nd, and Venezuela is July 25th. And at the beginning of July, we have recently decided to add Puerto Rico as well. So Puerto Rico will occur sometime at the end of June, and Gaza, which we had to reschedule due to illness, will also occur sometime at the end of June. And to get this information, you can go to our website, sanctionstribunal.org. My name is Nina Farnia. I'm the co-chair of the People's Tribunal, along with Helia Dotari, who will be one of our translators today, along with Anissa Hossein-Nejad and Ali Fakhr. Ali will be translating from English to Persian for our witnesses, and Helia and Anissa will be translating from Persian to English. So as some of you know, Iran is said to be under the heaviest sanctions regime in the world history. Because of this, Zoom is actually blocked in Iran. Many people can bypass this through VPNs, but if folks don't have access to VPNs, they cannot bypass this. So we are using Skype. Instead of Zoom, we normally use Zoom. Zoom has a simultaneous translation feature, so our hearings don't become super long if we have to translate. Skype does not. So we will be having consecutive translation. Everybody will be pausing, everybody but me, will be pausing every few sentences or so to allow time for translation. We apologize for this, but it's actually one of the reasons we're fighting against U.S. imperialism. So today you will hear from excellent witnesses from across different regions of Iran and different sectors, and they will be reflecting a true on-the-ground perspective of the impact of both U.S. sanctions and the blockade, but also UN sanctions. But what's notable about Iran in particular is that despite being subject to the most severe sanctions regime in the world, Iranians have adapted and survived. And so you're going to hear both the struggles of Iranian people and also the adaptations and survival mechanisms for survival that people have developed.
با عرض سلام به تمام شرکت کنندگان و بیننده ها که این جلسه محاکمه امپریالیسم آمریکا رو دنبال میکنید از طریق یوتیوب. به صورت مختصر خانم نینا درباره برنامه‌های این جلسات صحبت کردن. جلسه قبلی درباره سوریه بود، جلسه امروز درباره ایران، جلسه‌های بعدی ما با اون تواریخی که خانم نینا گفتن درباره یمن، عراق، هایتی، نیکاراگوا، کوبا و تواریخ مشخص این جلسات را ایشان ارائه کردن که شما میتونید از طریق وبسایت این جلسات تواریخ مشخص را به اصطلاح دنبال کنید. بعد از یک آدرس وبسایت هم ایشان گفتن، بکنم هست آدرس وبسایت. بعد از ما جلسه ما امروز درباره ایران، درباره تحریم های شدیدی که علیه ایران اعمال شد از طرف آمریکا، از طرف سازمان ملل، و این تحریم ها حقیقتا بی‌نظیر بود از لحاظ سختی و یکی از نشانه های این تحریم مسئله زوم که ما معمولا از زوم استفاده میکنیم در جلسات قبلی. زوم به ما کمک میکرد که ترجمه همزمان باشد، اما با توجه به این تحریم ها ما امروز مجبوریم از اسکایپ استفاده کنیم. اسکایپ این ترجمه همزمان را به اصطلاح این بنفیت را از دست ما گرفت، از ما مجبوریم از طریق اسکایپ از ترجمه کانسیکوتیو استفاده کنیم که این خورده بیشتر زمان میبره. لذا ما را ببخشید بابت این مسئله که دست ما خارجه. و ایشان هم گفتن که درباره تحریم هایی که علیه ایران اعمال شده ما در این جلسه درباره اثرات این تحریم ها صحبت خواهیم کرد با حضور شاهدان عینی که در داخل ایران هستند و با دل و جان و پوست به اصطلاح این را به اصطلاح حس میکنن و لمس میکنن و از تجربیات خود در این جلسه صحبت خواهند کرد. و مسئله دیگری که در این جلسه صحبت میکنن درباره موضع ایرانی ها نسبت به این تحریم ها و چگونه توانستن به اصطلاح سازگار بشن با این تحریم ها و چه مکانیزم های استفاده کردن در عبور از این تحریم ها، البته با توجه به عید سعید فطر به تمام اونهایی که این عید را جشن میگیرن هم عید مبارک میگن.
Thank you, Ali John. Before I introduce our first speaker, I'm going to introduce our jurors for the day. Our first juror is Marjorie Cohn. She's a law professor and the former president of the National Lawyers Guild, which is a people's bar, progressive people's bar association in the United States. Many of the people that are involved in the tribunal are also members of the National Lawyers Guild. Victor Good is our second juror, also a law professor and a member of the National Lawyers Guild and the National Conference of Black Lawyers. Maria LaHood is the litigation director at the Center for Constitutional Rights and has litigated some major victories for those of us located in the United States and on the left. And Michael Deutsch is a founder of the People's Law Office in Chicago and has also litigated some major victories for national liberation movements in the United States. Finally, we are honored to have Prabhat Patnaik with us, who's a Marxist scholar in India, from India, and author of many excellent books, including Capital and Imperialism. For those of you interested in imperialism, you should check out this book. Go ahead, Ali John.
اما قضات ما در این جلسه به صورت مختصر آقای خانم مارگیونی، ایشان استاد قانون هستند و متخصص در این مسائل قانونی، و بعد آقای ویکتور ایشان هم متخصص قانونی هستند. البته من به صورت مختصر میگم که بعداً در جریان جلسه مشخص میشه. و بعد آقای مایکل ایشان هم متخصص مسائل قانونی هستند و در این زمینه خیلی فعال هستند و به اصطلاح دستاوردهای مهمی در این زمینه داخل آمریکا داشتند. بعد آقای دابانکیان از هندن، ایشان هم متخصصن در این مسائل امپریالیسم و کتاب‌های در این زمینه هم دارن. فکر کنم یک آقای یا خانمی هم جا گذاشتن. برای اینها آقایون هستن که به عنوان قضا در این جلسه شرکت میکنن و در جریان جلسه بیشتر با اونها آشنا میشید.
Moving on, it is my real honor to introduce our first witness, Ali Reza Mir Ghaffari. He is president of the Association of Gas Refinery Union Workers in the Bushehr province in the south of Iran. He represents 14,000 workers in the South Pars field. This is the largest natural gas field in the world. And for those of you who are either members of unions or students of history, you know that the people that work on oil and gas fields are some of the most powerful people in the world. So welcome, Mr. Mir Ghaffari.
آقای میر غفاری، خوش آمدید به این جلسه. آقای غفاری ایشان رئیس انجمن متخصص در مسائل گاز در بوشهر و ایشان هم رئیس یه شرکتی در بوشهر هستن که فکر کنم 24,000 کارمند تو این زمینه فعال هستن و ایشان رئیس این گروه هستن. و شما میدونید کسانی که در این زمینه فعالن و کار میکنن حقیقتا اونها رو به عنوان قهرمان میتونن معرفی کنن، چون شرایط سختی را با شرایط سختی دست و پنجه در میکنن. آقای غفاری خوش آمدید.
به نام خدا، عرض سلام و ادب خدمت تمام حاضرین و هیئت منصفه محترم و قضاتی و حقوقدانایی که در جلسه امروز هستند. مختصری و کوتاه خودم رو معرفی میکنم. من علیرضا میرغفاری هستم، کارمند در واقع کارگر پالایشگاه گاز پارس جنوبی. در محدوده پالایشگاه گاز پارس جنوبی تشکلات کارگری داریم، فعالیت کارگری دارم و رئیس هیئت مدیره کانون انجمن‌های صنفی کارگران پالایشگاه گاز استان بوشهر هم هستم.
Thank you all so much. My name is Alireza Mirghafari. I am one of the workers in South Pars gas refinery located in Bushehr, Iran, and I'm also the president of the union in there. آقای میرغفاری بفرمایید.
خب من ابتدا با نام یاد خدا شروع میکنم و در تمام کارها از خداوند مدد میخوام. خب من در سال 88 در مقطع کاردانی رشته برق صنعتی از دانشگاه فارغ التحصیل شدم و مجددا بلافاصله در مقطع کارشناسی رشته برق‌کودرت در دانشگاه پذیرفته شدم.
I graduated in 2008 from the university with a bachelor degree in electrical engineering, and I was immediately accepted into the master's program for also electricity right after.
خب پس از اینکه دانشگاه قبول شدم سعی کردم همزمان با تحصیل کار متناسبی با رشته تحصیلی خودم پیدا کنم که در همون سال تونستم با یکی از شرکت‌های فعال در پروژه آب فاضلاب استان فارس همکاری خودم رو شروع کنم و آغاز دوره کاری من.
After being admitted to the university, as a student, I tried to find a job suitable for my field to gain experience. And in the same year, I started working with one of the companies active in water projects in Fars province in Iran.
از سال 88 تا پایان سال 91 به صورت ناپیوسته و همزمان با تحصیل با چند شرکت در حوزه آب فاضلاب کار کردم و خب متاسفانه با مشکلات فراوانی از جمله عدم تامین مالی پروژه، تأخیر چندین ماهه در پرداخت حقوق و دستمزد روبرو بودم.
From 2008 to 2011, I worked closely with several companies in this field, and at the same time, I was a student, and we faced many challenges, many problems, including the lack of funding for some of these projects, which resulted to several months of delay in our salaries.
شرایط به گونه‌ای بود که در بسیاری از مواقع کارگاه‌ها به مرحله تعطیلی و تعدیل نیرو می‌رسیدند و شرایط کاری مناسبی نداشتم و مدام در تلاش بودم تا شرایط کاری خودم را تغییر بدم.
The conditions were as such that many times the workplaces that I was involved in reached the stage of closure and layoff. And I didn't have as you can imagine, I did not have a good working condition. And I was constantly trying to change my working conditions and workplace.
اسم آواز عسلویه و پارس جنوبی به عنوان بزرگترین میدان گازی جهان به گوشم رسیده بود و به دنبال راهی بودم که بتونم در عسلویه مشغول به کار بشم.
I had heard about the fame of Asaluye and South Pars in Iran, the world's largest gas field, which is located in the south of Iran, and I was looking for a way to work in Asaluye.
در حقیقت تحریم‌های تجاری ایران باعث تعطیلی و ورشکستگی شرکت‌ها و کارخانه‌های فعال زیادی در شهرهای مختلف ایران و در شبکه‌های صنعتی استان فارس شده بود و آمار بیکاری افزایش پیدا کرده بود و اگر هم کاری پیدا می‌کردم باز به دلیل کمبود منابع مالی، دستمزدهای پایین و تأخیرهای زیادی که داشتن.
تموم کنین جملتون رو.
اوکی. و البته اضطرابی که همیشه همراه بود و داشتمش، هر لحظه ممکن بود کارگاه با کاهش تولید روبرو بشه یا نیروها رو تعدیل کنن یا به طور کامل تعطیل بشه.
In fact, Iran's trade sanctions and the sanctions that were imposed at the time caused the closure and the bankruptcy of many active companies and factories in the industrial towns of Fars, where I was at the time located, and the unemployment rates had increased. Of course, the anxiety and the stress that was associated with these conditions, I was just wanted at any moment, expecting to be laid off, expecting to face closure of the workplace that I was involved in. So it was just a very stressful working condition for me.
تحریم‌های تجاری و تحریم کالاهای صادراتی و جلوگیری از ورود مواد اولیه و تجهیزات مورد نیاز صنایع و کارخانه‌ها اثرات منفی زیادی در کشور به وجود آورده و بحران‌های اقتصادی، اجتماعی و فرهنگی رو به جامعه تحمیل می‌کرد.
Trade embargoes and sanctions on exports goods prevented the entry of raw materials and equipment needed for the industries and the factories that I was involved with. They caused many negative effects in the country, and they created social, economic, and cultural shocks and negative effects and crises in the society.
روزانه کالاها و خدمات مورد نیاز مردم به دلیل افزایش هزینه‌های تولید و کاهش ارزش پول ملی گرانتر می‌شدند.
Every day, the goods and the services needed by the people became more and more expensive due to the increase in production cost and the decrease in the value of the national currency.
نوسان قیمت و افزایشی بودن محصولات شوک‌های اقتصادی و عصبی پی در پی به جامعه وارد می‌کردند.
The fluctuation in prices and the increase in the products prices bring a lot of shocks and doubts in the society over the years.
خب به هر صورت موفق شدم در ابتدای سال 1392 در تحت توسعه میادین گازی پارس جنوبی فازهای 15 و 16 در استان بوشهر کاری پیدا کنم.
So anyhow, at the beginning of 2012, I managed to find a job in the South Pars gas field development plan, and particularly in the phases 15 and 16.
خب خاطرات خوبی از عسلیه و کسانی که قبل از شروع تحریم‌ها در اینجا کار کرده بودند شنیده بودم.
I had heard great memories of Asaluye and people who used to work there before sanctions hit, and they were always telling me about great memories and great conditions that they were working in.
صدای من رو دارید؟
بله، صداتون رو الان داریم.
پدرم دوست صمیمی داشت که از سال 80 تا 84 در عسلیه با یکی از شرکت‌های خارجی نفتی فعال در عسلیه کار کرده بود و درآمدش به گونه‌ای بود که تونسته بود با 4 سال کار کردن در عسلیه بسیاری از نیازهای زندگی خودش رو تامین کنه و به یه زندگی مرفهی دست پیدا کرده بود.
My father had a friend who worked with an oil company in Asaluye from 2002 to 2006, and his income was as such that only in 4 years he told us that he was able to meet many of his needs and the financial goals that he had for his life by working 4 years in Asaluye.
برداشت منم از عسلیه یه همچین جایی بود، جایی که منم میتونم زندگی مرفهی داشته باشم.
My impression of Asaluye was also based on this, was that I could live a good life as a worker in there.
به هر حال به عنوان
آقای میرغفاری صداتون الان داریم دوباره. بله
آقای میرغفاری اگه ویدیوتون رو خاموش کنین شاید بهتر بشه.
عذرخواهی میکنم، من مشکل اینترنت دارم اینجا یه خورده، ببخشید اگه وقفه‌ای به وجود اومد.
نه احتیاج نیست عذرخواهی کنین.
خب به عنوان بخشکار صنعتی در اینجا مشغول به کار شدم، اما متاسفانه با همون داستان تکراری برخوردم، با همون داستان تکراری تحریم ها و چالش هایی که گریبانگیر اصلویه هم شده بود.
I got a job as an industrial electrician in Asaluye, but unfortunately I ran into the same old story again on sanctions.
عدم تامین مالی، تخصیص بودجه و آسیب‌های ناشی از آن، حقوق‌هایی که هیچ نظم و انضباطی نداشت، خوابگاه‌های فرسوده، خدمات رفاهی ضعیف، ممانعت از ورود کالا و تجهیزات مورد نیاز، جلوگیری از ارتباط مالی با سایر کشورها و همه این اتفاقات در بخش کارگری دست به دست هم می‌داد و نارضایتی شدیدی به وجود می‌آورد.
So sanctions and challenges that were imposed as a result of sanctions made a really bad working condition for us. Lack of funding and budget allocation because of the lack of revenue due to sanctions was one of the resulting damages. Salaries were not paid adequately, were not paid on time. There was no accommodation and accommodation for workers that were adequately provided. There was poor welfare services preventing the entry of goods and needed equipment for our work, and sanctions also prevented other countries' financial relations with Iran, which meant that investors and other companies would not be able to participate or partake in the projects that were ongoing. All of these conditions created a very dissatisfactory labor conditions for us in this sector, and as a worker in South Pars, we were under severe economic, social, and cultural pressure. بفرمایید آقای میرغفاری.
خب کارگران در این منطقه به شدت تحت فشارهای اقتصادی، اجتماعی و فرهنگی قرار گرفته بودند و خاطرم هست که بعد از 7 ماه کار کردن تنها درصدی از حقوق 1 ماه رو به ما دادن و در اکثر مواقع حقوق یک جا پرداخت نشد و حقوقمون به صورت قسطی و در چند نوبت دریافت میکردیم که بیشتر شبیه یه جورایی پول تو جیبی بود تا بخوایم بهش اسم حقوق بذاریم و بهش بگیم حقوق میگرفتیم.
I remember that after working for 7 months, that they only gave us only a percentage of 1 month's salary, and most of the time the salaries were not paid at all at once or properly as they should be, and we received our salaries in installments as if it was a pocket money rather than salaries.
خب اثری از خاطرات 10 سال پیش اصلیه وجود نداشت و کارگران قدیمی‌تر همیشه با حسرتی خاص از آن دوران، از دوران شکوفای پارس جنوبی برای من تعریف می‌کردن و جالب اینجا بود که عموم مردم هم همین ذهنیت رو از اصلیه داشتن و فکر می‌کردن هر کسی در اصلیه کار می‌کنه شرایط مالی بسیار مطلوب و خوبی داره.
There was no trace left of Asaluya 10 years ago from what my father's friend had told me. And the old workers even always talked about that era that I never experienced, and with a special regret about it. And it was interesting that the general public had still the same mentality about Asaluya 10 years ago, and they thought that everyone who worked at Asaluya had a very good and a stable working and financial conditions, but that just was not true.
برداشتی که خودم هم قبل از ورود به اصلیه داشتم همین بود. خروج شرکت‌های بزرگ نفتی به دلیل تحریم و آسیب‌های ناشی از اون رو در مقابل چشمانم می‌دیدم. تحریم‌های مالی و بانکی، عدم ورود تجهیزات و کالای مورد نیاز، ورود شرکت‌های بزرگی مانند توتال، انی، هیوندای، زیمنس و خیلی دیگه هم از لحاظ فنی و هم از بعد نیروی انسانی آسیب‌های بد و جبران ناپذیری رو به کشور و عموم مردم و به تبعش در دست اون کارگران مظلوم وارد می‌کرد.
So financial and banking sanctions, the avoidance or stopping any entry of necessary equipments and goods for the projects that we were working on, withdrawal of large companies such as Total, Eni, Hyundai, Siemens. This is a translator speaking. I might be mispronouncing the names, but we'll include those in the report, and many others, both technically and from the human resource side. They had devastating damages to the industry, and naturally, and especially at the heart of them, to the workers in those industries.
تأخیر چند ماه در پرداخت حقوق‌ها، وقفه در پرداخت بیمه‌ها، همه دست به دست هم داده بودند و شرایط بدی به وجود اومده بود.
There were delays in insurances that we were supposed to be paid, in salaries, and they had made for a terrible working condition.
خب با چشمان خودم شاهد بودم که کارگری که جوشکاری مشغول به جوشکاری بود در کارگاه و حرفه جوشکاری داشت، بعد از 7 ماه یک ریال حقوق نگرفته بود و این در شرایطی بود که همسرش توی بیمارستان بستری بود و پول کافی برای عمل جراحی همسرش نداشت.
I witnessed with my own eyes that one of the workers had not received a single penny from his salary after 7 months, in a situation where his wife was hospitalized, and he did not even have money for his wife's surgery, and he was under so much pressure that he found no other way than.
آنقدر تحت فشار بود که راهی جز تردید به خودکشی پیدا نکرد و با سرعت از دکل 80 متری مخابرات داخل کارگاه بالا رفت و تهدید کرد که اگر حقوقش رو پرداخت نکنن خودش رو از بالا به پایین میندازه. میتونیم بگیم که آستانه صبر و تحملش تمام شده.
He was under so much pressure that he found no other way than threatening to kill himself, to commit suicide, and that was what he was left with. He climbed up a telecommunication operator for about 80 meters inside the workplace and threatened to just jump off. And if he was not paid his salary, you could say that his patience was over.
یا حتی یادم میاد که توی استان خوزستان کارگری خودش رو از یکی از دکل‌های نفتی حلق‌آویز کرد و از بین رفت، خودکشی کرد.
Or I remember that in Khuzestan, one of the south provinces in Iran, close to Bushehr, one of the workers hung himself from one of the ring drilling rings and passed away.
تصاویر این خاطرات تلخ همیشه جلوی چشمانم هست و هرگز نمیتونم فراموششون کنم. تحریما روز به روز وضعیت کارگران رو وخیم‌تر میکرد و کارگاه‌ها بعضا نمیتونستن با تمام ظرفیت به کار خودشون ادامه بدن و این موضوع باعث شده بود پیدا کردن کار سخت و سخت‌تر بشه.
The images of these bitter memories are always in front of my eyes. They're stuck in my head, and I can never forget them. Sanctions made the situation of the workers and the conditions of our workplaces worse day by day. And the workplaces and the workshops we were at, sometimes they could not continue their work in full capacity, and this made it very difficult for us to switch jobs or find jobs.
بعضی از همکلاسی‌های دوران دانشجوییم که بعد از من برای پیدا کردن کار به اصلیه می اومدن نمیتونستن کار مورد نظر خودشون رو پیدا کنن و کاری پیدا کنن که مرتبط با تحصیلاتشون باشه.
Some of my classmates who came to Asaluya after me, they were unable to find jobs that were related to their studies. So the situation was getting worse and worse.
شاید من شانس آورده بودم که زودتر از اونا به اصلیه اومده بودم.
Maybe I was just lucky to have come to Asaluya earlier than them.
ذکر این نکته هم خیلی مهم و حائز اهمیته که کار در اصلیه به خاطر دمای بالا، رطوبت و آلودگی شدید هوا خیلی سخته و طاقت فرساست و هر کسی توان و تحمل کار کردن در چنین شرایطی دور از خانواده و به صورت اقماری نداره.
It is also very important to mention that working in Asaluya is very difficult and exhausting due to the high temperature of the environment, humidity, and severe air pollution. And so because of these conditions, not everyone has the ability and tolerance to work in such condition apart from family.
با همه این تفاصیل اصلیه که روزی برای همه فرصت‌های شغلی داخلش وجود داشت و برای همه فرصت کار پیدا کردن رو فراهم کرده بود و خیلی حاضر نبودن حتی با حقوق‌های بالا در اصلیه کار کنن، به جای رسید که متقاضیان کار زیادی پیدا کرد. متقاضیانی که حاضر بودن شرایط کمپ‌ها با تراکم جمعیت بالا، کیفیت پایین خدمات، تأخیر چند ماهه در دریافت حقوق رو بپذیرن و در اصلیه مشغول به کار بشن.
So with all these conditions, Asaluya, which once provided the opportunity to work in great conditions for workers, and many were not willing to work there, even in high salaries at the time because of the weather and just the environmental condition, reached a point where there were many job applicants who were willing to accept the existing conditions of camps with high pollution, low quality of service, and so on and so forth. And there were including delayed salaries and all that, but just work there.
حالا اگه بخوایم از منظر دیگه هم به آسیب‌های تحریم بپردازیم، تأثیریه که تحریم روی بهره‌وری و ایمنی محیط کارگاه گذاشته بود.
If we want to look at the damage of the sanctions regime from another perspective, I'd like to talk about the effect that the sanctions had on or have on the productivity and safety of the workplace environment.
تحریم کالا و تجهیزات طوری بود که شرکت‌های خارجی به مسئولیت‌ها و تعهدات خودشون در قبال گارانتی و پشتیبانی کاری و تجهیزاتی که فروخته بودند نداشتند و به گارانتی‌های خودشون هم پایبند نبودند.
So what sanctions look like for us on the ground is that the foreign companies that initially sold the equipments and the technology to us did not adhere to their responsibilities and obligations regarding the warranty and services that they provide after selling these products of our work equipments.
خب در بعضی مواقع تعمیرات در واقع تجهیزات با وقفه مواجه میشد، بعضا به مرور زمان با مستهلک شدن تجهیزات نفر ساعت زیادی صرف تعمیر و نگهداشت اون پلن صنعتی پالایشگاه یا پتروشیمی میشد که این موضوع در برخی اوقات بربرداری رو مختل و یا کاهش میداد.
Sometimes repairs of equipments that we were using were interrupted because of this. Repairs and maintenance were carried out by extended hours by our own workers. This sometimes hindered or reduced the operations or banned safety equipments, such as devices that detect the leakage of a dangerous gas and fire, sometimes causing fatal accidents.
یا تعلیم تجهیزات ایمنی مثل دستگاه تشخیص دهنده نشت گازهای خطرناک و مشتعل شونده و آتش حادثه‌های مهلکی رو رقم میزد. به عنوان نمونه در یکی از طرح‌های توسعه‌ای پارس جنوبی سنسورهای تشخیص دهنده نشت گاز به موقع در مدار قرار نگرفتند و باعث شد یکی از ردیف‌های شیرین‌سازی گاز ترش از در واقع دچار حریق و آتش سوزی بشه و حالا تا اونجایی که یادم هست برآوردی نزدیک به $70 میلیون خسارت داشت.
For example, in one of the development plans of South Pars, the gas leak detection sensor were not placed in the circuit on time and caused one of the sections, which I can't use the technical words, this is the interpreter speaking, one of the sections completely catch on fire, and it caused nearly roughly $70 million in damage.
خب این حادثه به راحتی میتونست خسارت‌های جانی جبران ناپذیری هم داشته باشه.
This incident could have also had irreplaceable damages in terms of human life.
در پایان هیئت منصفه محترم، قضات محترم، شاید بیان این موضوع هم خالی از لطف نباشه که بدونیم تحریم‌ها آسیب‌های زیادی به ایران و علل خصوص درک‌های پایین جامعه وارد کرد که هدف اصلی تحریم کنندگان هم بدون شک همین موضوع بود.
Honorable jury, dear jurors, perhaps it's worth mentioning that sanctions caused a lot of damage in Iran, as I talked about briefly here, especially in the lower and working class in the society, which was undoubtedly one of the main goals of sanctions regime to harm the most vulnerable group.
و هدف اصلی تحریم در واقع هدف گرفتن گروه‌های آسیب پذیرتر در جامعه بود.
لطفاً بفرمایید اینجا رو گفت.
هدف در واقع تحریم آسیب زدن به گروه‌های آسیب پذیر و آسیب پذیر بوده.
The goal of the sanctions were they were designed to harm the vulnerable group, including and especially the workers.
ولی تحریم تاثیرات مثبت و دستاوردهایی هم به همراه داشته.
But the sanctions also brought positive effects and achievements for us.
امروز ساخت حجم بالایی از تجهیزات مورد نیاز صنایع طراحی، اجرا، راه‌اندازی، بهره برداری از طرح‌های نفت، گاز، پتروشیمی به دست متخصصان داخلی انجام میشه.
Today, the construction of a large volume of required equipment, design, implementation, commissioning and operation of large oil, gas, and petrochemical project is done indigenously, and it's done by our domestic experts. And many of our areas are not, they don't need service or assistance from outside any longer.
و در حوزه‌های بسیاری ما را از خارجی‌ها بی‌نیاز کرده.
بفرمایید آقای میرغفاری ادامه.
و در حوزه بسیاری ما را از خارجی‌ها بی‌نیاز کرده. بسیاری از تجهیزاتی که تا چند سال پیش و در گذشته نه چندان دور تحریم بودیم و از ارائه خدمات و کالاها ما رو محروم می‌کردند، امروز توسط دانشمندان، متخصصان و جوانان ایرانی ساخته میشه.
Today, Iran is much more resistant and powerful than 20 years ago. And as an Iranian who experienced the negative impact and devastating impact of sanctions on my personal life, and as the smallest members of the working class and family in Iran.
این موضوع در تمام زمینه‌ها و سایر صنایع به وضوح قابل مشاهده است. امروز ایران بسیار مقاومتر و قدرتمندتر از 20 سال پیشه. به عنوان یک ایرانی که تحریم بر زندگی شخصی اثرات سو و منفی زیادی گذاشته و به عنوان کوچکترین عضو خانواده کارگری ایران یقین دارم که شرکت‌های ایرانی میتونن با اتکا به لطف خداوند و توان متخصصان خودشون در اکثر زمینه‌ها با سایر کشورهای دنیا رقابت جدی داشته باشن و بدون شک حرفای زیادی برای گفتن دارم.
As a part of this family, I'm sure that Iranian companies can rely on the grace of God, and they have established the ability and will only grow stronger to strengthen their experts to compete seriously with other foreign companies in the world in our field, and they have a lot to offer and they have a lot to bring to the table.
خیلی خوشحالم که در جمع شما بودم و امیدوارم مثمر ثمر باشه شهادت من.
Thank you all so much for your time, and I hope that this is helpful.
Thank you very much. خیلی ممنون آقای میرغفاری. That was brilliant. That was a brilliant presentation. Thank you.
آقای میرغفاری.
خیلی ممنون آقای غفاری و حقیقتا شهادت شما خیلی عالی بود.
I'm now going to
متشکرم.
بفرمایید.
متشکرم و ممنون از شما که فضای حقایق رو باز میکنید برای همه. خیلی خوشحالم که در جمع شما بودم.
Just so folks know who haven't participated in the past, the speakers will speak, and then at the end, the jurors will ask the speakers questions. And the juror questions tend to be pretty detailed and great. So I'm sure we'll hear more from آقای میرغفاری.
فکر کنم آقای میرغفاری جزئیات بیشتری داشته باشن، اما این جزئیات رو واگذار میکنیم به موقع سوالات قضات. اون موقع شما میتونید بیشتر صحبت کنید و جزئیات بیشتری ارائه کنید.
I'm now going to introduce Leila Inayati. She's a member of the board of directors of the United Nations Association of Iran and the educational deputy for the organization Defending Victims of Violence that has consultative status to the UN Economic and Social Council. She's also getting a PhD candidate in international relations. She'll be presenting on issues facing NGOs in Iran. She's also worked closely with cancer patients over the last 20 years and will be discussing the impact of sanctions on cancer patients in particular.
سخنران بعدی ما خانم لیلا عنایتی هستند. ایشان فعال مسائل بشردوستانه و در هیئت ایران در سازمان ملل و ایشان در این زمینه فعال هستند و ایشان PhD دارن در زمینه روابط بین المللی و همچنین اما سخنرانی ایشان یا شهادت ایشان درباره چالش هایی که NGO ها سازمان های غیر دولتی با آن مواجه هستند و همچنین درباره چالش هایی که بیماران سرطان در ایران با آن مواجه هستند که درباره آن صحبت خواهند کرد. بفرمایید خانم لیلا عنایتی.
لیلا جون صدا نداره. صداتون خاموشه.
میشه آن میوت کنید؟
سلام عرض میکنم. من دارید؟
بله صداتون میشنم.
بله. سلام عرض میکنم خدمت دوستان گرامی قضات محترم. خوشحال هستم که تو این جمع هستم و میتونم حالا کمک حداقل به جامعه بیماران سرطانی و همچنین سازمان‌های غیر دولتی داشته باشم. من توی 2 حوزه قرار هست که در واقع صحبت کنم. یکیش بحث تحریم هایی که مانع از انتقال فاند برای پروژه های بین المللی برای سازمان های غیر دولتی میشه و دیگری هم تحریم هایی که مانع از دسترسی بیماران سرطانی به روش های تشخیصی و دارو میشه.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Thank you to the honorable jurors. I hope that my testimony here today would be able to help the NGOs and the cancer patients in Iran. I'll be conducting my testimony in 2 areas. One against sanctions that have prevented the transfer of funds for international human rights projects by Iran and by the NGOs in Iran. And secondly, against the sanctions that have prevented the access for cancer patients to diagnostic methods and medicine.
حوزه اولی که صحبت میکنم بحث همون انتقال فاند برای پروژه های بین المللی برای سازمان های غیر دولتی هستش که در واقع ما این تجربه رو 2 بار از سال 2010 تا کنون داشتیم.
The first area that I'll be talking about is the issues with transferring funds for NGOs in Iran. We've had this issue twice since the year 2010.
سال 2010 صندوق دموکراسی سازمان ملل پروژه‌ای رو در واقع طرح کرد که سازمان‌های غیر دولتی میتونستن روش پروپوزال بدن و ما جزء سازمان‌هایی بودیم که برنده این فاند شدیم. $115,000 بود و موضوع در واقع این پروژه هم آموزش نحوه مشارکت در فرآیندهای دموکراتیک برای سازمان‌های غیر دولتی بود.
In 2010, the United Nations Democracy Fund proposed a project that we won with our proposal, which was to teach participation in democratic processes to citizens, and the amount of the prize was $115,000.
ما پروژه رو تدوین کردیم. قرار بود برای 1650 ذینفع در 3 استان بزرگ ایران و در هر استان برای 25 سازمان غیر دولتی این پروژه اجرا بشه.
We wrote a proposal that was supposed to help in 3 large provinces, help 25 NGOs in each province and benefit 1,650 beneficiaries in each section.
هدف پروژه هم حمایت و ارتقاء حقوق بشر، دموکراسی و جامعه مدنی بود.
The goal of the project was to support and promote human rights and civil societies.
یک بار در سال 2010 و یک بار هم 7 سال بعد از اون در سال 2017 ما برنده این پروژه شدیم و هر 2 بار هم امکان گرفتن این فاند رو نداشتیم.
We were winners of this prize in 2 years, one in 2010 and one in 2017, 7 years later. And in both instances, we were not able to, they were not able to transfer us the money, the prize.
ما برای 8 سال پیگیری مداوم کردیم که یه راهی پیدا کنیم که در واقع این فاند ترانسفر بشه به ما و ما بتونیم این رو اون پروژمون رو عملیاتی کنیم و اجرا کنیم، اما توی این 8 سال از هیچ راهی نتونستیم در واقع این فاند رو دریافت کنیم.
We have tried for 8 years to get access to the funds that we won and transfer the money to Iran so that we could implement the project and provide funds for our beneficiaries, but we were not able to do that.
ما ایمیلی رو از صندوق دموکراسی دریافت کردیم که توی اون ایمیل کاملا واضح گفته شده که به علت سانکشن ها ما نمیتونیم این پول رو ترانسفر کنیم و نهایتاً راه حلی که به ما پیشنهاد دادن این بود که این فاند رو به یکی از آژانس های سازمان ملل مثلا به UNDP بدن و ما از UNDP فاند رو بگیریم.
in our communications with the UN Democracy Center, they told us that because of the sanctions that are imposed on Iran, there is no way for us to access the funds. And one of the ways that they suggested is for the funds to be transferred for a UN section and then for us to be receiving the money from them.
که این راه حل هم در واقع راه به جایی نبرد به علت اینکه اون آژانس سازمان مللی که قرار بود این پول بهش داده بشه گفتن که ما گزارش مالی باید بدیم و برای فاندی که قرار هست فقط ترانسفر کنیم امکان پذیر نیست برای ما این کار.
The solution did not work as either because the UN section that we were supposed to transfer the funds to, and then they would be transferring the funds to us, said that due to audits and reports that they would have to go through, they will not be able to do this work and transfer the funds.
بنابراین ما هیچ کدوم از این دو پروژه رو نتونستیم بگیریم و این در حالی هستش که کشورهای غربی ادعای دموکراسی و ایجاد دموکراسی تو سایر کشورها رو دارن و این پروژه موضوعش دموکراسی بود و ما نتونستیم اجرا کنیم.
The purpose of this project was to promote democracy, and it is interesting that the Western countries who hail democracy are the ones who are preventing us to access these funds to implement democratic processes within Iran.
ایمیلی هم توی در واقع متنی که من خدمت خانم دوتاقی دادم ایمیلی رو هم که گفته شده توش که به علت سانکشن ها ما این پول رو ترانسفر نمیتونیم بکنیم تصویر اون ایمیل رو هم من ارسال کردم که حالا بعداً میتونم این رو ارائه بدم.
The email that you see on the screen right now is the evidence of our communications with the UN that states specifically the funds that we want are not able to be transferred to us because of the sanctions imposed on Iran.
بعد از این پروژه های دیگری هم بود که از طرف اتحادیه اروپا یا حالا سایر آژانس های سازمان ملل یا سایر بخش های سازمان ملل در واقع پیشنهاد شده بود ولی خب ما هیچ کدوم رو نتونستیم دیگه اپلای کنیم به خاطر اینکه میدونستیم با این مشکل ترانسفر پول مواجه خواهیم شد.
After this project, we were other EU agencies and other sectors of the UN were proposing to us to apply for some projects, but due to this money transfer issue that we had experience with, we knew that we don't have the opportunity to apply for any of the other opportunities.
حوزه دومی که من میخوام روش صحبت کنم بحث تاثیر تحریم بر دسترسی بیماران سرطانی به روش‌های تشخیصی و دارو هست.
The second part that I would like to talk about is the unilateral coercive measures, the sanctions efforts and the cancer patients will not be, the effects of sanctions on cancer patients for accessing diagnostic and medical reasons. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Sorry.
یکی از مسائل عمده‌ای که توی بحث بیماران سرطانی باش مواجه هستیم یا حالا به صورت کلی بیماران توی ایران بحث انتقال پول هست.
One of the main things that any patients would face is the transfer of money.
علیرغم اینکه امریکا مدام ادعا میکنه که کالاهای بشردوستانه معاف از تحریم هستند، اما بعضی از تحریم ها مثل تحریم بانکی و معاملاتی در واقع تولید کننده های دارو در ایران که نیاز به مواد اولیه دارن و همچنین مصرف کننده های دارو رو با چالش خرید دارو مواجه کرده، با چالش خرید دارو و مواد اولیه تولید دارو مواجه کرده.
Despite the U.S.'s talks that the humanitarian goods are excused from sanctions, existence of other sanctions like sanctions on banking and trading sectors has created many challenges for drug manufacturers in Iran as well as patients.
در واقع میشه گفت که این ادعای معافیت از تحریم یه ادعای گزافه که همونطور که میدونیم خیلی از داروهای اساسی بیماران سرطانی یا مواد اولیه تولید این داروها یا خیلی گرونه و یا نایابه توی ایران.
We can say that the U.S. talks about humanitarian goods are not being sanctions is a lie, because as you know, buying it's really difficult and expensive to buy the goods needed for producing medicine.
من یه مثالی خدمتتون میزنم، یه تجربه‌ای در واقع به اشتراک میذارم که فکر می‌کنم به فهم این موضوع خیلی بیشتر کمک میکنه. سفری که مأموریت کاری که اخیراً من به سوئیس داشتم، یه بیمار سرطانی از داخل ایران دارویی رو سفارش داد که ما از اونجا براشون بیاریم. ایشون یه بیمار سرطانی داشتن داخل ایران.
I'm going to talk about one of my recent experiences that is going to shed some illuminating light on this situation. On one of my recent trips to Switzerland, one of our patients was ordering a cancer drug for us to bring for them.
دارویی که ما اونجا تهیه کردیم 1 دوز درمان یک بیمار سرطانی بود، یعنی فقط 1 دوزش بود و این خانواده‌ای که این دارو رو می‌خواستن 200 میلیون وام گرفتن که ما این دارو رو براشون تهیه کنیم بیاریم و اگر دیدن روی بیمارشون این دارو جواب میده بعد خونه‌شون رو بفروشن که بتونن دوزهای بعدی درمان بیمارشون رو دریافت کنن.
The patient's the dose of the drug that we were buying from outside of the Iran was only 1 dose of this cancer patient's needs, and it cost $200 million tomans in Iran's currency, and we were buying this drug for them to try once, and if it worked, they were going to sell their house so that they can buy the rest of the dosage for their patients' needs.
یعنی در واقع اون 1 دوز $4,000 هزینه داشت برای اون خانواده.
That 1 dose cost the family $4,000.
امثال این بیمار توی ایران خیلی زیاده. ما در واقع یک سازمانی که من باهاشون دارم کار میکنم انجمن پزشکان حامی بیماران بی‌بضاعت هستن و امثال این NGO مستقیما با بیماران سرطانی به خصوص کودکان سرطانی سر و کار داره.
There are many examples like this in Iran. One of the agencies that I work with is the doctors in protection of patients with lower income, and and we defend a lot of children who are not able to access medical care, specifically for cancer.
در واقع برای درمان خیلی از این کودکان ما کمک‌های خیریه جمع می‌کنیم به علت اینکه این کودکان تو خانواده‌های فقیر توی در واقع مناطق محروم زندگی میکنن، خانواده‌های فقیر جمعیت توی مناطق محروم زندگی میکنن و توانایی در واقع پرداخت هزینه‌های درمان و دارو رو ندارن برای این بچه‌ها. بنابراین کمک‌های خیریه‌ای جمع میکنیم.
We ask for donations and help to help these children who mostly live in underdeveloped areas and within lower income families who do not have access to any financial means to be putting their child through the treatment that is needed for the treatment of their cancer.
و ما بعضی از این بچه‌ها رو جلوی چشممون از دست میدیم به خاطر اینکه توانایی پرداخت هزینه‌های تشخیص و درمان رو ندارن خانواده‌هاشون.
We see in front of our eyes children dying just because their families are not able to afford the cost of their treatment.
و پرونده های این بچه ها موجود هست.
And we have the medical records of all of these children who have passed away because of the lack of financial access to get treatment.
یه حوزه دیگه که در واقع به همین بحث بیماران سرطانی مربوط میشه بحث اقدامات تشخیصی این بیماران هست.
Another area that is connected to the cancer issue is detection and early detection of cancer for cancer patients.
در واقع همونطور که میدونید مبارزه با سرطان یه سری الزامات داره که مهمترینش تشخیص زود هنگام سرطان هستش که درمان رو میتونه آسون کنه و امکان پذیر کنه.
Fighting cancer requires many things, but as you know, early detection is one of the most important factors in fighting cancer.
در واقع میشه گفتش که همون مطالعات تصویربرداری دقیق مثل MRI کل بدن و در واقع اون نتایج پاتولوژیک صحیح هستش که میتونه به تشخیص زود هنگام سرطان کمک کنه.
Things that can help with the early detection of cancer and the further treatments are careful imaging studies like MRI and accurate pathological results and studies.
یه بخشی که تو همین حوزه تشخیص بیش از همه با محدودیت در واقع با این محدودیت‌های در واقع ناشی از تحریم در معرض خطر قرار گرفته پزشکی هسته‌ای هستش.
In the field of diagnostic, the sector most at risk because of these unilateral sanctions is the nuclear medicine.
در واقع برای آزمایش تشخیصی پت‌اسکن برای بیماران سرطانی این در واقع این بخش خیلی مهم هستش، اما چون با صنعت انرژی اتمی مرتبط هست زیر فشار تحریم ها قرار گرفته و تحت تحریم قرار گرفته توی ایران.
Nuclear medicine is an area that is necessary for PET scan, which is really important for diagnosing cancer and the spread of cancer. And due to its connection with Iran's nuclear energy industry, it has come under the pressure of sanctions.
شرکت پارس ایزوتوپ تنها تأمین کننده داروهای رادیواکتیو مورد مصرف مراکز پزشکی هسته‌ای ایران هستش که از جمله شرکت‌هایی که بعد از خروج یک جانبه امریکا از توافق هسته‌ای به فهرست تحریم‌های وزارت خزانه‌داری امریکا اضافه شد.
Pars Isotope is the only company and supplier of radioactive drugs that are used by Iran's nuclear medical centers, and is one of the companies that was added to the sanction list of the U.S. Treasury Department after the unilateral withdrawal of the U.S. from the nuclear agreement with Iran.
و تحریم این شرکت در واقع فعالیت‌های تشخیصی و درمانی وابسته به داروهای رادیواکتیو رو مختل کرد، چرا که بیش از 180 مرکز پزشکی هسته‌ای ایران تحت شعاع قرار گرفتن که در واقع این 180 مرکز پزشکی هسته‌ای سالانه به بیش از 1 میلیون بیمار توی ایران خدمات سلامت ارائه میدن.
This inhumane act led to the disruption of diagnostic and therapeutical activities related to radioactive drugs, which include more than 180 nuclear medicine centers in Iran that provide health services to more than 1 million Iranian patients annually.
وبسایت رسمی وزارت خزانه‌داری امریکا که من لینکش رو هم میتونم در اختیار بذارم، شرکت پارس ایزوتوپ رو به عنوان یک شرکت مرتبط با سازمان انرژی اتمی ایران تحریم کرده.
According to the reports of the official site of the U.S. Treasury Department, Pars Isotope Company has been sanctioned as a company related to the atomic energy organizations of Iran. And I will provide that for you all as well.
تجربه‌ای که من خودم تو همین بحث در واقع تشخیص در واقع حوزه تشخیصی پت اسکن داشتم مربوط به بیماری پدرم هست.
My personal experience in the section of diagnosing cancer is related to my father cancer diagnosis. And it's relation to PET scan.
حدود 2 سال پیش پدر من مبتلا به بیماری سرطان شد.
Around 2 years ago, my father was diagnosed with cancer.
فقط مرحله تشخیص اینکه سرطان کدوم قسمت بدن رو درگیر کرده، فقط تشخیص این که در واقع به همون بحث پت اسکن و در واقع بحث‌های مربوط به نتایج پاتولوژیک و اینا مربوط میشد، فقط مرحله تشخیص بیماری پدر من 2 ماه طول کشید.
Only the diagnosis section of his treatment, which is related to the pathology, which is related to PET scan, took 2 months.
و همین باعث شد که بیماری سرطان به بقیه قسمت‌های بدن سرایت کنه و در واقع متاستاز بده و درمان پدر من رو غیر ممکن کرد.
That long diagnostic section related to his cancer being metastasized to other parts of his body, and his cancer became untreatable.
در واقع این مرحله تشخیص اگر سریعتر انجام میشد ممکن بود پدر من درمان میشد و ما الان ایشون رو داشتیم در کنارمون، ولی خب این اتفاق نیفتاد و من پدرم رو از دست دادم و امثال پدر من توی ایران زیاد هستن که این اتفاق براشون میفته، چه بسا بسیاری از کودکانی که ما توی این در واقع انجمن داریم میبینیم.
If my father was able to access diagnosis treatments early, he might have been able to receive the treatment that he needed and survive cancer and be here with us today. Yet he died, and there are many examples like my father. The children that we work in our organization are all also suffering from this issue.
بحث دیگه‌ای که در واقع اهمیت داره توی این حوزه بحث تحویل دارو و مواد اولیه ساخت دارو هستش برای بیماران سرطانی.
Another section that is important and is related to this area is delivery of medicine and raw materials for making the medicines for cancer patients.
مواد اولیه در واقع این رادیو داروها مثل یخ هستن و در صورت عدم تحویل به موقع ذوب و فاسد میشن.
These the raw materials needed for these nuclear medicines are like ice, and it's really important that they are delivered and transferred in a timely manner, because if not, they will be useless.
این به این معنی که این مواد عمر کوتاهی دارن و مسئله سرعت حمل و نقلشون یه مسئله خیلی حیاتی هستش.
These raw materials have a very short lifespan, and the delivery and transportation of these raw materials becomes really, really important.
و همونطور که میدونید ما توی در واقع خدمات هوانوردی هم دسترسیمون به واسطه تحریم ها محدود شده. به همین خاطر تحویل مواد اولیه این داروها مختل شده و همین باعث میشه که یا داروها یا مواد اولیه بی‌کیفیت به دست ما برسه و یا اینکه کمتر از نیاز واقعی جامعه بیمار ایران در واقع این داروها برسه و همین باعث میشه که تمام اون فرآیندهای تشخیصی به تعویق بیفته و بعد هم مراحل درمانی و دسترسی بیماران به دارو به تعویق بیفته.
As you know, the aviation system in Iran is also under sanction, and that not only makes us receive less than raw material than we actually need, but also it causes the materials that are received to be spoiled or useless, and that in effect affects the diagnostic and testing for the cancer patient and their treatment.
تو بحث اقدامات درمانی هم، یعنی بعد از اون بحث انتقال پول و اقدامات تشخیصی و تحویل دارو، بحث خود در واقع اقدامات درمانی هزینه بر و غیر قابل دسترس هستش.
After the not having access to medicine, the not being able to transfer money, after not being able to have the medical equipment to do the correct diagnosis, we also still have the issue of the actual treatment of cancer being very expensive and unreachable for low-income families.
درمان سرطان از جمله جراحی با فناوری‌های پیشرفته، شیمی درمانی، رادیوتراپی و حالا پیگیری‌های درمانی برای بیماران سرطانی بسیار گران قیمت هستش و کاملا تحت تاثیر UCM ها در واقع این اتفاق افتاده و یه بخشش هم برمیگرده به مشکلات اقتصادی که اونها هم باز ناشی از تحریم ها هستش.
Cancer treatment, including high-tech surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and expensive follow-ups that are needed for the treatment, are all negatively affected by the sanctions imposed on Iran and the sanctions that are, in general, making the society a much poorer society and affect the society negatively.
سالانه توی ایران 3500 کودک مبتلا به سرطان تشخیص داده میشه که از هر دو کودک یک نفر درگیر این بیماری میشه.
Every year in Iran, more than 3,500 children are diagnosed with cancer. That means 1 in every 2 children.
و از اونجایی که خیلی از این کودکان توی مناطق محروم هستن و وضعیت اقتصادی مناسبی ندارن برای پیگیری درمان و تشخیص و دسترسی به دارو، خیلی از این کودکان رو ما توی کودکی از دست میدیم.
Due to the fact that many of these children live in underrepresented areas, in low-income families, and have no way of accessing the treatment, the diagnosis, and the drugs that are needed for their treatment, we lose these children.
که همونطور که عرض کردم پرونده های این کودکان هست و در واقع تلاش هایی که ما کردیم و شاید تو بعضی مواردش نتیجه خاصی نگرفتیم و اینها در واقع این کودکان همه قربانیان تحریم هستن.
We have, as I said before, we have the medical records of all of these children and our efforts to help them and support them, and these children are all they all died because of sanctions.
من صحبتام پایان پذیرفت. امیدوارم که در واقع این هیرینگ سشن بتونه کمک کنه که حداقل یه کمک کوچیکی به این کودکان و بیماران سرطانی باشه.
I have reached the end of my testimony, but I hope that my testimony will be able to help some relief for these children fighting for their lives and dealing with cancer. Thank you, Dr. Anayati. Sorry.
ممنون از شما.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anayati, and thank you for sharing your personal story with us.
خیلی ممنون خانم دکتر عنایتی و از اینکه تجربه شخصی خود را با من در میان گذاشتید.
Our next presenter will be Dr. Mohammad Parvizi. He's an MD, PhD with also a master's in public health and a professor of molecular dermatology in, I think at Shiraz University in Iran.
سخنرانی بعدی ما آقای دکتر محمد پرویزی، ایشان متخصص امور سلامت هستند و PhD در این خصوص دارند. من ترجمه سعی میکنم تا زمان برای ایشان مناسب باشد برای سخنرانی. بفرمایید آقای پرویزی.
We have, prior to the presentation, we're going to share a video with you, and that video, just to provide is a little bit difficult to watch.
قراره که قبل از سخنرانی ایشان یه ویدیوی نشون بدیم ولی فکر کنم به خاطر مسائل فنی خیلی سخته مثلا ارائه کنیم. نمیدونم.
بذار پانسمانش عوض کنم. خب عوض کن. در از بالاش بکش بیاد پایین.
میدونم چیکار کنم.
یواش
میکنم.
اصلا چیزی نشون داده نمیشه البته الان هیچی شیر نیست.
اسپری بزنم؟
نه دارم میگم.
چه اسپری بزن باید دوخونه بشه.
میسوزه.
خب پس با ماکش بزن.
پوادم میسوزه.
خب آروم میزنم سب بده. آروم میزنم. آروم میزنم.
میسوزه.
میسوزه. میدونم یواش.
آروم جون خودش. آروم میسوزه.
خواستم.
نه میسوزه. ای.
آروم میکنه میگه آروم تر از که نمیشه. سب کن تو دست نزن. خب اسپری میزنم یه چند دقیقه صبر بده.
میسوزه نزن میسوزه واقعا. نزن وسطش خیلی میسوزه وسط دو تا انگوشم میسوزه ماما میسوزه نزن وسطش در میگه نزن بهش میشه دست نکن غذا میشه در میگه نکن میگه یواش بزن خیلی یواش کمش رو بیرون
آروم میزنم صبر کن بده.
ببخشید این ویدیو نشون داده نمیشه کسی میبینه اینو؟
آره دیدیم دکتر پرویزی.
برای من چیزی نشون داده نشد. شاید مشکل از اینترنت بنده باشه.
شاید. بفرمایید.
اوکی. من با اجازهتون اسکرین شیر میکنم.
بذارین لطفاً دکتر پرویزی بذارین سلاید شو اگه بتونین.
الان نشون داده میشه؟
بله آره خوبه الان.
اوکی. سلام و وقت بخیر میگم خدمت تمامی حضار محترم، قضات محترم.
Hi to all the juries and jurors presented here.
من دکتر محمد مهدی پرویزی هستم، نماینده خانه ایبی ایران، نماینده وزارت بهداشت ایران و نماینده و صدای تمامی بیماران ایبی ایران.
I am Dr. Mohammad Parvizi, member of the EB House of Iran, member of the medical sector of Iran, and representative of all the EB patients in Iran.
عضو هیئت علمی دانشگاه علوم پزشکی شیراز هستم، در مرکز تحقیقات مولکولی پوست دانشگاه. PhD در پزشک هستم و PhD در کامپلمنتری مدیسین یا طب مکمل، MPH سیاستگذاری سلامت، کارشناسی ارشد یا مستر آف ساینس مدیکال ادویکیشن و مستر آف ساینس مدیکال جورنالیسم.
I am the assistant professor of molecular dermatology research center in Shiraz, and I have my PhD of medicine and a master of public health policy and master of medical education and medical journalism.
و 37 سال سن دارم.
And I'm 37 years old.
من ابتدا صحبتم رو در عرض 3 و 4 دقیقه در خصوص ماهیت بیماری پروانه‌ای یا بیماری ایبی اپیدرمولوژیس بلوزا ارائه میدم خدمتتون.
I'm going to speak for a few minutes about EB or butterfly disease and its effects.
بیماری پروانه‌ای یا اپیدمیولایزد بلوزا یک بیماری ژنتیکی است که با ظهور تاول‌ها یا جراحات پوستی معمولاً از هنگام تولد آغاز میشه و فرد و خانواده اون رو درگیر خودش میکنه.
EB is a genetic disease that starts from infancy and shows itself through blisters, and it involves the whole it involves the whole family.
متاسفانه علاوه بر پوست تمام مخاط بیمار هم درگیر هست و از معده، مری و سایر مخاط دیگه از دهان هم گرفته درگیر تاول‌ها و زخم‌ها میشه.
Unfortunately, this is the kind of disease that not only affects the skin, but also it can affect the intestinal tract of the patients, the mouth, and in severe cases, the mouth and the lining of the stomach.
عموماً از بعد به تولد آغاز میشه تظاهرات بیماری. در موارد خفیفتر میتونه با تأخیر بیشتری شروع بشه وقتی بچه حرکت میکنه. در موارد خیلی خفیفتر میتونه وقتی بچه بالا فرد بزرگ میشه در برابر جراحات یا تروماهای مختلف قرار میگیره خودش رو بروز بده، اما به طور کلی متاسفانه در حال حاضر درمان قطعی ندارد و تماما درمانهای حمایتی است.
EB can present itself in severe cases in infancy when the child is born. When it's not super severe, it can show itself in teenage years or in adulthood when the patient is produced with an injury. Unfortunately, EB does not have an actual treatment. All the treatments are preventative measures.
علاوه بر مشکلات پوستی، افتادن ناخن، عدم رشد ناخن، تاول‌های پوستی، ریزش مو به طور وسیع در سر، میلیاهای تظاهرات پوستی دیگر به نام میلیا در پوست، مشکلات شدید دندانی، مشکلات شدید بلع و خارش شدید درگیر این بیماران خواهد شد.
Other than the blistering of the skin, EB unfortunately attacks the nails of patients, blisters inside the mouth and throat. It causes for hair loss, the skin that is really fragile and thin, and it affects a lot of dental problems for the patients and difficulty swallowing. And itchy, very itchy skin.
و به طور کلی یا وراثتی به صورت اتوزومال مغلوب یا اتوزومال دامیننت یا اتوزومال رسسیو هست که فرم شایع بیشتر اتوزومال رسسیو هست که از پدر و مادر سالم اما ناقل ایجاد میشه، به بچه به ارث میرسه.
In many cases, the disease is transferred to the infant from healthy parents with a negative gene.
به طور کلی 4 نوع از EB وجود داره: EB سیمپلکس، EB جانکشنال، EB دیستروفی که از همه شدیدتر هست و EB کیندلر یا کیندلر سیندروم که اخیراً به EB اضافه شده، به EB سیندروم اضافه شده، اما تظاهرات بسیار کمتر هست. اما مشکل اصلی EB جانکشنال و EB دیستروفیک هست که ضایعات شدید پوستی عمیق‌تر همراه با درد و تظاهرات رو که گفتیم بیشتر از همه در این دو نوع خصوصا EB دیستروفیک بروز میکنه.
In general, there are four different kinds of EB: EB simplex, EB junctional, dystropic EB, and Kindler EB. Kindler EB has been added to this section very recently, and it's very rare. The main areas of problem are junctional and dystropic EB, which have more blisters and are much more painful and have all the symptoms in a more severe way.
کامپلیکیشن های مختلفی بیماران EB باهاش درگیر هستن که شایع ترین هاش عفونت های جلدی، عفونت خون یا سپتیسمی، فیوژن یا چسبندگی شدید انگشتان که باعث محو شدن انگشتان دست و پا میشه، مشکلات تغذیه، یبوست شدید، مشکلات دندان و مرگ.
There are a lot of complications that EB patients face, including infection of the skin, bloodstream infection. EB causes the fingers of the patients to be fused together, so then they would lose their hands and their feet. EB patients have problems with nutrition and severe constipation, and EB patients also face a lot of dental problems, and the main cause of their death is EB.
و متاسفانه تنها درمانی که داره درمان‌های حمایتی است نشستن در جای نرم، جلوگیری از تروما، پانسمان‌های مختلف و جلوگیری از عوارض و عفونت‌هایی که عرض کردم خدمتتون.
As we mentioned before, there is no cure for EB, but there are a lot of preventative measures that the patient and their family can take, including gently handling the child or sitting and putting the patient in a very gentle area, and other preventative measures that can be taken.
به خاطر عوارضی که گفته شد و اینکه یک بیماری کامپلکس هست، تخصص‌های مختلف پزشکی و پرستاری و پیاپزشکی نیازمند هست که یک بیمار ایبی رو بتونه ساپورت کنه و منیج کنه، از جراحی، پوست، متخصصین دندان، پرستاران متبحر، متخصصین گوارش و غیره.
Due to the complex nature of EB as a disease, in order to support an EB patient well, a lot of different sectors of medical sectors need to be collaborating with each other to support the EB patient, including dermatologists, well-versed nurses, medical specialists, dietitians, and dentists that specialize in this case.
تقریبا تنها پانسمانی که اغلب بچه‌ها باهاش راحت هستن و احساس آرامش میکنن باهاش و ترمیم زخم رو میتونه بهبود ببخشه، پانسمان مپیلکس هست از کشور سوئد.
One of the only dressings and that can help the EB patients, and it's been shown that a lot of the children are comfortable with it, is Meplex, which is produced in Sweden.
این پانسمان تقریبا تایید شده یه دبرا هست که مؤسسه بین‌المللی و خیریه بیماران پروانه‌ای جهان هست در آمریکا و اروپا.
The Mepilex dressing has been validated by DEBLA. I think this is the translator saying, I'm sorry if it's incorrect, by United States and the EU.
در ایران 931 بیمار پروانه‌ای وجود داره که تنها نهاد رسمی حامی بیماران پروانه‌ای خانه ایبی هست که از سال 94 حدوداً توسط آقای سید حمیدرضا گلپایگانی، هاشمی گلپایگانی تأسیس شده و تا الان که حدوداً 8 الی 9 سال از تأسیسش میگذره حمایت بچه‌ها رو به عهده گرفته و تقریبا بیماران پروانه‌ای رو تا الان پیدا کرده در سطح کشور و مورد حمایت و خدماتی قرار داده.
In Iran, there are close to 931 EB patients, and Iran is also home to the EB Home, which is a center providing resources and care for EB patients. Mr. Golpaygani started the institution about 8 years ago, and thus far has been able to identify and provide resources for all the EB patients in Iran.
به طور کلی 440 بیمار دختر و 491 بیمار پسر در ایران وجود داره.
In general, we have 440 female EB patients and around 491 male EB patients.
و متاسفانه اغلب این بیماران در رنج سنی کودکسال و نوجوان هستند و اغلب به دلیل عوارض و بیماری مختلف و مطمئناً به خاطر عدم دسترسی به درمان‌های حمایتی مناسب در سن بالاتر فوت می‌کنند.
Unfortunately, a lot of the EB patients that we have in Iran are in the younger age ranges, and as you can see, the most of them, due to lack of access to preventative measure and care, and the complications that are caused by EB, will pass away at an older age.
در سال 1397 خانه ایبی تقاضای خرید پانسمان از شرکت مونلیکه یا همون شرکت سازنده مپیلکس رو انجام داد و متاسفانه اون سال شرکت مونلیکه طی یک نامه رسمی عدم اجازه و عدم تمایل به فروش پانسمان‌های مربوط به بیماران پروانه‌ای رو صراحتاً و رسما اعلام کرد و دلیل اون رو تحریم‌های آمریکا اعلام کرد، گرچه معافیت‌های غذایی و دارویی در تحریم‌ها ادعا شده، اما به خاطر حالا به هر حال تعاملات مالی این حوزه هم بسیار تحت الشعاع قرار گرفته و این خرید امکان پذیر نشد و تا الان هم این مشکل حل نشده.
In 2019, the House of EB requested from Molnike, a producer of the preventative bandages for EB patients, requested the bandages, but the Molnike, as you can see in this evidence, they refused to provide the House of EB with the medication, and they stated that they are not able to do that due to the U.S. Unilateral sanctions, even though the sanctions state that it's not going to affect the humanitarian aids.
این پانسمان هایی است که تقریباً 1 سال پیش توسط یونیسف از طریق هزینه‌ای که آلمان واریز کرده بود به ایران تحویل داده شد در مقدار محدود که با مدیریت خانه ایبی و وزارت بهداشت به صورت ماهانه یا هر 15 روز یک بار به تعدادی از بیماران که نیازمندتر هستن داده میشه و بیماری که شدیدتر باشه بیشتر شاملش میشه، بیماران خفیفتر کمتر، اما با توجه به محدودیت تعداد موجود این مقدار پانسمان برای بسیاری از بیماران بسیار محدود هست و خیلی از خانواده ها این پانسمان ها رو پس از استفاده اول میشورند و استفاده مکرر میکنن که از نظر بهداشتی و سلامت کاملا خلاف اصول استانداردی است، ولی خب به اجبار این کار انجام میشه. این یک پکیجی است که توسط خانه ایبی و شرکت مپلس از پانسمان‌های اهدای یونیسف هست که من نشون دادم که حالا به صورت رایگان به ایران تحویل داده شده. البته
The package you can see in this image is a package that was last year gifted to us by UNICEF in conjunction with a German company, but the numbers of these bandages are so little that the House of EB distributes them based on the most needed patients due to the lack of equipment and the lack of these bandages. Some of the families would have to reuse their bandages, which is completely against the medical what the doctors prescribe, but they would wash the bandages and reuse them because there is no more of these bandages.
متاسفانه این پانسمان ها امکان ورود به کشور نداره و هرچی هم بیاد به صورت چمدانی و قاچاق هست و با قیمت خیلی گرون به خاطر این تحریم ها داره فروخته میشه اگر گیر بیاد در بازار آزاد.
Unfortunately, there is no way for these bandages to be provided to Iran, and anything that we see in the market is either brought to Iran illegally or through travelers to the outside of Iran, and the price of them are incredibly expensive.
هم مستندی است و مستندی از سایت یونیسف که پانسمان ها به ایران تحویل داده.
And this is an image that says that the UNICEF has provided this bandages to Iran.
متاسفانه این ترس و این نگرانی وجود داره که تحقیقات فعلی که امیدوارم به درمان‌های جدیدتر، کلاژن درمانی، درژن تراپی‌های تاپیکال و موضعی به تحقق بپیونده و تاییدیه FDA رو بگیره، به علت تحریم ها مجددا به ایران نرسه و همچنان بیماران ایرانی در زجر و تحمل این زجرها مجبور به گذران زندگی باشن و این سندی از تحقیقاتی که امروزه و به روز داره مجددا چاپ میشه، روزانه داره داکیومنت های علمی داره میاد بیرون و متاسفانه بیماران ایبی ایران به خاطر تحریم های جورایی فقط حسرت اونو میخورن که اگر این هم بیاد به خاطر هزینه های زیاد امکان استفاده و خرید برای ایران و ورودش به ایران وجود نداشته باشه.
What you saw in the last image are the evidences of the research, the new research that is being done for other forms of treating EB, like collagen therapy. But one of the fears that the EB patients in Iran have is that due to sanctions, even these new forms of treatment will not be accessible for the Iranian EB patients, or if they are, they will be extremely expensive and out of reach for most of them.
متاسفانه برخی پمادهای دارویی مانند بیوفن یا مبو یا داروهای دیگه که برای ترمیم زخم اثرهای خوبی دارن به خاطر تحریم‌ها یا وارد نمیشه یا اگر وارد بشه به صورت چمدانی، قاچاق و محدود توسط مسافرانی که به ایران میان به صورت محدود برای افرادی که آشنا داشته باشن آورده میشه و تعداد کثیری از بیماران از دریافت اینها بسیار محرومند.
The image you see in the screen is Biofane, one of the only tropical creams that has been shown to be helpful for EB patients. Again, this is due to sanctions. We are not able to have it in Iran, and any form of that you see in Iran is either brought in by other family members who are traveling outside and they know somebody who will be bringing the cream for them. So accessing it is incredibly expensive or not possible for most of the EB patients.
و این لیستی از بیمارانی که تقریبا از سال 95 تا کنون حدود 15 بیمار بیشتر از اینها هست به خاطر عوارض ناشی از این بیماری و عدم حمایت‌های مناسب متأسفانه فوت شد.
The list that you see here is the list of patients that have died because of the lack of preventative care through the bandages and the creams in Iran due to sanction. Although there are more names that could be put here, but these are all the names, and the list of that will be provided for the jurors.
تمام بیمارانی که اینجا من عکسشون رو گذاشتم بیماران مستقیم بنده هستن. یکی از زخم‌های بنده است. تمام اینها از شهنام، از حقیقی، از مریم منفرد، رحمانی که یک بیمار افغان هست، بیمارانی هستند، مثالی از بیمارانی هستند که من اینجا مستقیم دیدم، عکس ها مستقیم گرفته شده و بدون هیچ گونه فتوشاپ یا بدون هیچ گونه تغییر در عکس اینجا گذاشته شده.
The images and evidence that you can see here are from my own direct patients, and one of the images is of me, and these images are unedited. They're not photoshopped. These are all my patients who are dealing with EB and are facing lack of treatment because of sanctions.
حتی به خاطر هزینه‌های زیاد حتی این درمان‌های حمایتی برخی خانواده‌ها در بعد تولد بچه‌ها رو سر راه می‌ذارن و تقریبا تا الان حدود 4-5 کیس داریم که بچه به بهزیستی سپرده شده و خانواده‌اش مشخص نیست و بعضی خانواده‌ها به صورت فرزند خوانده اینها رو قبول کردن و حمایت میکنن.
Due to the high cost of dealing with patients with AB, some of parents will put their kids for adoption because they are not able to provide care for them. And as you can see, there are other families who will take these EB patients and children in so that they can care for them.
با توجه به اینکه من خودم شیراز بیماران ایبی رو فالوآپ و پیگیری میکنم، در شیراز 64 بیمار در مرکز ما ثبت شده که 37 پسر و 27 دختر هستن.
I personally work with EB patient in Shiraz, and we have total of 64 EB patients. From that, there are 27 that are female and 37 that are male.
و در مرکزی هم که ما هستیم اغلب بیماران در سن خردسال و نوجوانی هستند.
In the organization that I work for, most of these 64 patients are children or teenagers.
اما من در حد 1 الی 2 دقیقه خواهم گفت که این بیماران علیرغم این همه مشکلات و دردهایی که دارن میتونن در صورتی که حمایت بشن و دردها و رنجهاشون کم بشه افراد موفقی از درون این افراد بیمار بیرون بیاد.
I'm going to speak for a few minutes about patients who even although they have to go through all of these pains of dealing with EB, if they have access to preventative measures, if they have access to all of those drugs, they can lead healthy and happy lives.
این خودم هستم و خواهرم هر دو مبتلا به ایبی دیستروفیک خیلی شدید، دستها کاملا چسبیده، پاها انگشت‌ها کاملا چسبیده، زخم‌های شدید و متولد 1985 یعنی حدوداً 38 سال داریم و هر دو تحصیل کرده، بنده پزشک و خواهرم کارشناسی ارشد در رشته زیست شناسی.
The picture you see here is me and my sister. Both of us have a severe case of EB, this dystrophic EB, where our hands and our feet are joined together. And although with all the complications, she has been able to gain her biology master's. And obviously, Dr. Mohammed is a doctor.
اما این تلاش ها به جرئت میشه گفت 100 برابر تلاش یک فرد عادی و بدون مشکل هست و یک فرد بتونه در حالا رشته‌ای که میخواد علاقه‌ای که داره موفق باشه.
The patient with an EB to reach this level of excellence would have to work 100 times harder than someone without an EB complication to reach any of their goals.
این خودم هستم در آفیسمون در مرکزمون.
This is the image. Sorry. The previous image that you saw is Dr. Parvizi in his office, and the second picture is his sister in his office.
ما ابراهیم رو داریم که علیرغم اینکه کاملا دستها چسبیده توانایی و رانندگی رو پیدا کرده، اما نکته دردآور اینجاست که به علت تحریم ها حتی ماشین مناسب سازی معلولین هم در ایران وجود نداره و وارد نمیشه و ایران هم متاسفانه امکان ساخت ماشین مناسب سازی شده رو برای معلولین به هیچ عنوان حداقل تا الان نداره و این حق بیماران هست که بتونن از ماشین ها و اتومبیل های شخصی مناسب سازی شده استفاده کنن.
The image you see here is Ibrahim Rahmani. He is an EB patient in which his hands are all glued together because of EB. Even with those complications, he's able to drive a car. The sad part is that because of sanctions, we are not able to provide cars in Iran for people with disability or manufacture cars in ourselves for people with disability. And that prevents the EB patients and all the disabled people in Iran from accessing their basic needs.
در مورد سایر درمان‌های حمایتی و پروتزها هم تقریبا ایران به علت تحریم‌ها خیلی موفق نبوده در ساخت و فراهم آوری مواردی که در برخی از موارد ایبی در خارج از کشور به صورت حالا عکس‌هاش وجود داره و ایران هم از این پروتزهای مصنوعی تقریبا محرومند.
Iranian EB patients are also prevented from having access to the other forms of preventative care that are helpful for EB patients to lead a normal life, and all of that is due to sanctions.
بیمار دیگری به نام عادل مهندسی پزشکی خونده. کارشناسی ارشد مهندسی پزشکی.
Adel is another patient who has a bachelor's and master's degree in medical equipment engineering.
آتنا دانشجوی PhD Information of Science هست.
Atena is another EB patient who is a PhD, who is earning her PhD in informational science field.
هادی که متاسفانه چند ماه پیش فوت شد کارشناس ارشد حقوق جزا داشت.
And Hadi, who unfortunately died a few months ago, had a master's in law.
و حتی ما آرتیست داریم در بیماران پروانه‌ای.
We have artists within the EB patient community.
و حتی هنرمند و نقاش داریم که حتی این دست‌ها که الان دارید می‌بینید الان به شدت چسبیده شده و حتی بعضی بیماران ما دو دستی نقاشی می‌کشند.
We also have painters within AB patient community. The patient you see here that is able to hold their painting equipment with one hand. Her hands are currently much more glued together, so she would have to hold the pen with two hands to be able to
و حتی در بین بیماران با اینکه دستها به طور کامل چسبیده و هیچ انگشتی وجود نداره با استفاده از کش یا چسب به صورت سنتور یا سایر آلات موسیقی رو به راحتی و بسیار زیبا می‌نوازند که حالا به خاطر ضیق وقت امکان گذاشتن مستندش وجود نداره.
We also have musicians within the EB patient community, which is kind of amazing due to the fact that all of their fingers are glued together, so they have engineered new ways of figuring out how to work with the instrument. Due to the lack of time, I don't have time to provide you with a video of it, but it is available.
در پایان من تشکر میکنم از اینکه صدای بنده رو شنیدید. من به عنوان صدای بیماران پروانه‌ای، صدای خانه ایبی ایران و صدای وزارت بهداشت ایران این اعتراض خودم رو نسبت به تحریم‌های آمریکا که باعث میشه این بیماران در رنج و درد بیشتری سپری کنند، پانسمان‌ها و داروهای حمایتی، حتی پروتزهای مناسب، امکانات حمایتی مناسب نشه تأمین کرد یا با هزینه‌های خیلی گزاف که امکان استفادهش توسط بسیاری از بیماران پروانه‌ای و خانواده قابل پرداخت نیست. به گوش شما قضات برسونم که امیدوارم مورد توجه قرار بگیره. همه این بیماران حق زندگی دارند که به صورت و اگر درمان حمایتی که تا الان وجود داره در دسترس اینها قرار بگیره، امکان یک زندگی نرمالتر، حتی بسیاری از آنها امکان ازدواج، امکان اشتغال و فرد مؤثری در جامعه میتوانند باشند.
And at the end, I would like to thank you all for listening to me as a voice of an EB patients in Iran, as the voice of the House of EB in Iran, as the voice of the medical community in Iran, for listening to the effects of sanction on EB patients due to lack of access for preventative measures that would help the quality of life of the EB patients in Iran. These sanctions are taking the right of living from the EB patients in Iran, and if the patients are provided with the necessary resources, they would not only have the opportunity to lead a healthy life, they would be able to have a future, get married, and join the workforce community. But unfortunately, due to sanctions, we are not able to do.
و به عنوان نکته آخر ما حتی مشکل در انتقال کمک‌های خیریه‌ای که از خارج از کشور به خانه ایبی ایران یا بیماران دیگه میشه متاسفانه مشکل داریم و امکان انتقال پول به راحتی وجود نداره. و در پایان از اینکه اگر ارائه طولانی شد من عذرخواهی میکنم، امیدوارم که بخشیده بشم.
And the last point I want to mention is that due to the sanctions on Iran, currently we're not even able to access the donations and humanitarian aids that our people would like to provide for EB patients in Iran. Due to the sanctions on banking and transferring of the money. I would like to apologize for going over my time, and thank you.
خدا نگهدارش.
Goodbye.
خیلی ممنون دکتر پرویزی. میشه لطفاً screen share؟ مرسی، خیلی ممنون. Thank you very much, Dr. Parvizi. That was excellent. Now, an attorney located here in the U.S., Mr. Lashkari, is going to speak. He's working closely with Dr. Parvizi, and he's going to speak about litigation that they're filing against the sanctions and to protect children with EB in Iran. And Mr. Lashkari, would you prefer to translate yourself, or would you prefer one of us to translate for you?
Sure, I can do the translations also, since I'm bilingual. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can other folks hear him okay?
We can hear you. And Mr. Lashkari, if I may, you don't have to do anything in Farsi. Please go ahead in English, and we're going to provide a very brief Farsi translation at the end of your presentation.
Sure, just go ahead and go through it, or stop every now and then.
No, please go ahead and finish, like do a complete presentation, and I'm going to be sharing my screen as you go through it.
Sure. You can share the first item. My name is David Lashkari. I graduated from University of California at Berkeley with a degree in engineering with an emphasis in structural engineering. I began my career as a structural engineer doing structural analysis on buildings and structure to withstand earthquake and other dynamic forces. After doing that for about a decade, I began to testify in court as an engineering expert witness in cases of major accidents which had caused death and injuries to individuals. The idea of seeking justice in courtroom for victims of accidents and mishaps, usually against large and powerful and very, very usually very greedy corporations, insurance companies, became very attractive to me, which led me to attend law schools in Washington, D.C. Area, including Georgetown University School of Law, and I obtained a degree in law, a Juris Doctorate degree, and began practicing law more than 20 years ago. I must add that this has been a joy because most of my practice is focused on personal injury and representing the injured victim of accidents against these large insurance companies who usually do not want to pay a fair compensation, either no compensation or fair compensation, and that's their easiest way of making money. So I presently represent injured victims of accidents, mostly injured victims of truck and car accidents and other types of accidents. I represent on a pro bono basis a group of Iranian children with epidermolysis bullosa, or in abbreviation EB. Dr. Parvizi, who's our intended expert witness for potential U.S. District Court litigation, covered the characteristics of the necessary medical care for EB patients. Second slide, please. Letter from Monlike to EB home of Iran. Following the imposition of the so-called maximum pressure sanctions against Iran by Trump in 2018, Monlike Healthcare of Gothenburg, Sweden, the manufacturer of EB dressing or wound patches for EB patients, stopped shipping its EB wound treatment patches to Iran for fear of violating Trump's sanctions versus Iran. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has continued to maintain the same sanctions that Trump imposed on Iran. We have conducted legal research on this issue, and I will briefly, since the time is limited, I will briefly try to cover the topics very briefly. The maximum pressure sanctions versus Iran, and if we could have the third, which is the 22 USC 8806C slide. We will be covering the relevant law that will deal with sanctions of humanitarian nature versus Iran. One of the prime sections of U.S. Code, that's United States Code of Law, that's USC for abbreviation. One of the prime sections is this particular 22 USC section 8806 subparagraph C. And that's humanitarian exception. Very clearly, the US law says the president may not impose sanctions under subsection A with respect to any person for conducting or facilitating a transaction for the sale of, in this case, medicine or medical devices to Iran. So this is, very clear, unambiguous words here. It is stated that the president may not impose sanctions. So what we basically have is the executive branch of this government, Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden, functionally violating a very clear language of U.S. law. Now, the second slide, please, which would be 22 U.S.C. 8806 subparagraph A. As you can see, the section C refers to subsection A. And subsection A basically talks about sanctions against Iran. These are the sanctions, the initial sanctions that were imposed at the end of 2012. And so Congress enacted this law in early 2013. And it says these sanctions would only be imposed against financial institutions that are somehow referred into subsection B. And what subsection B actually talks about are Iranian financial institutions that are engaged in proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and they are supportive of Iran's support for so-called international terrorism, or actually, let's say, fighting and resisting the U.S. terrorism, or Iran's abuse of human rights, which for somebody who has been practicing more than 20 years in U.S. courts and also having visited U.S. federal prisons on many occasions, clients, and U.S. state prisons, having experienced that. And for the last 10 years, having been involved with litigation in Iran and having visited Iranian prisons, I find this subsection of Iran's abuse of human rights to be actually laughable, because they really need to look at the prisons in Iran and compare to the dungeons that we have here in the US. The next slide, which would be 22 USC 8513, subsection A, subparagraph D, number 2 paragraph. Again, this is a law that very clearly actually puts an affirmative prohibition against the president to impose sanctions under paragraph A, paragraph 1, with respect to any person conducting or facilitating a transaction for the sale of medicine or medical devices to Iran. So this is the second section of U.S. Code. This is the law that is enacted by Congress that says the president, the executive branch may not impose sanctions on transfer of medicine and medical devices to Iran. Next slide, please, which is 22 USC 7202, subparagraph A. And what we had actually in subparagraph A, what we have here, it basically says, again, this is another section of the law, the president may not, N-O-T, may not impose a unilateral sanction on medical sanctions against a foreign country or foreign entity unless the president has brought the case before the Congress, and the subparagraph 1 and subparagraph of 1A, B, C, A, B, and 2, and B, and these are the subsection that briefly, for the sake of time, I summarize it. It says the president, if he wants to impose medical sanctions on any country, he has to appear before Congress, and he has to appear 60 days before these sanctions, he proposed sanctions for medical medicine and medical devices are to be enacted. And he shall report to Congress. He has to describe in detail the activity that is proposed specifically to be prohibited, restricted, and then describe the actions by the foreign country that justifies the sanctions. And then there is enacted into law a joint resolution stating the approval of Congress for the report submitted under paragraph 1. And our research shows that this law has not been complied with at all. Next paragraph, please. Next slide, which is 50 USC 1702, subparagraph B, subparagraph 2. This is in regard to U.S. nonprofit organizations, U.S. NGOs cannot be prohibited, specifically under subparagraph 2, prohibited from sending medical devices and medical supplies to Iran for humanitarian basis. And this is the strategy that we have for providing the preconditions for this litigation. This is a very complex litigation, and in order to be successful, we really need to look at it. I, as a torts lawyer, as a personal injury lawyer, I think I have a fairly good understanding of what we need in terms of evidentiary proof, how we prove these cases. And that's why we are working with our patients and we are working with our intended expert, Dr. Parvizi of Shiraz School of University of Medical Sciences, on providing evidentiary proof for our patients to be submitted at the time that we file this action through an administrative process. And hopefully the members of the Lawyers Guild that are listening, they should know the other end of this proposal, this preconditions that we have set, is to engage some NGO in the US to attempt to use 50 USC 1702 subparagraph B, subparagraph 2, to try to purchase medical devices and medical supplies, which is, according to this law, is completely legal to do that. And there is a chance that they will be prohibited. And I think that would ripen our case for federal litigation. And that's what we are proposing to any NGO who may be able to help us with this litigation. Contrary to all these laws that I just cited, if you go to the OFAC's website, you will see a memo, a letter titled "Financial Channels to facilitate humanitarian trade with Iran and related due diligence and reporting expectations." This is actually a 4-page memo of many loopholes that any financial institutions have to jump through to basically get some sort of exemption from OFAC to send medical supplies to Iran. And this loophole is actually functionally, it's impossible. And the best proof that we have for it is the fact that no financial institution in the world has applied for this, because it's almost impossible. It requires financial institutions to submit monthly reports. Now, this is a financial institution that for maybe $100 or $200 or $500 engages in facilitating a transaction between a U.S. concern like an NGO and an NGO in Iran, such as EB, the Home of Iran, an NGO in Iran. No financial institution would go through for $500 to go through satisfying this without going bankrupt. So what we have OFAC, Office of within the Department of Commerce, that deals with the messages with sanctions over Iran to basically go against the U.S. law and impose this loophole. And since we don't have any more time. I end my presentation here. If there are any questions, I can be searched David Lashkari on Google. You can find me easily. And any questions, any assistance that I could get from folks who want to help in this, because I know that once we start litigation, one of the excuses that the other side, the government lawyers, will come up with, oh, you didn't try it, did you? Did you have a US NGO try to do this or all these laws, try to go by these laws? So that's one of the first things we want to do, along with what we are doing in Iran to collect evidentiary proof for our potential litigation. Thank you very much for everybody. And again, I'm available if there's any questions or any offer of help in this pro bono matter. I would appreciate that, and I'm sure my clients, the EB children of Iran, would appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Mr. Lashkari, that was excellent. Thank you very much. And the lawyers and the jurors, I think, really appreciated this testimony. And definitely, we will be in touch. And I think some of our jurors who are litigators, we'll continue this discussion as the tribunal concludes and we begin to identify paths for litigation. Our next presenter is Dr. Yunus Arab. He's the director of the Thalassemia Association of Iran, and he teaches at the, he's the director of the Thalassemia Association, and he's going to discuss the impact of sanctions on thalassemia patients. I know this is taking a while, and I appreciate everybody's patience, especially the speakers and the jurors. For the purposes of time, we are going to stop translating in Farsi until the Q&A portion begins. So Dr. Arab will present in Persian, and then we'll translate in English. Dr. Marandi will conclude in English, and I encourage you to stay on. Both presenters are going to be excellent, but we will not be translating Dr. Marandi into Farsi, and then we'll resume translation once Q&A begins. Okay. I think we have a video before Dr. Arab presents, right? Dr. Arab, are you on?
آقای عرب صدای ما رو میشنوین؟
بله من در خدمتتونم.
ما ویدیو رو پخش میکنیم و بعد در خدمت شما هستیم.
بسیار.
احمد هستم، 12 سالمه. من نظیر هستم، 8 سالمه، تالاسمی دارم.
از کوچیکی تازه فهمیدیم 2 ساله شدیم دیگه بیماری تالاسمی داشتیم.
از 2 سالگی درگیر تالاسمی هستم تا به الان.
من 33 سالمه، از 2 سالگی درگیر این بیماری.
هر ماه یک بار میریم بیمارستان، بعد صبح ساعت 6 تا 8 بعد از ظهر. مامانم میره بانک خون، خونا رو میده، خون میارن.
در موقعی که خون تزریق نکنیم یه مدت از حال میرن، کمخونی شدید میشه.
من خودم ای منفیم، سخت گیر میاد.
در آخرین مرگمون زود رسید.
مثلا بچه‌ها از حال میرن، دارو نداشته باشن، شکمشون بزرگ میشه، کبدشون، تا حالشون رو باید برداری.
از 7 سالگی هم که تعال بر.
We've stopped the video because it wasn't coming through, but just to translate quickly, one of the complications of thalassemia is an enlarged spleen, and thalassemia patients need blood transfusions, and that is difficult to come by as a result of the sanctions. I'll let Dr. Arab present now.
جناب عرب بفرمایید، ما در خدمت شما هستیم.
شاید من این رو کامل بخونم یا نه پاسپورت بخونم بعدش برای
اگر پاراگراف به پاراگراف بخونین خیلی ممنون میشم.
بسیار. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. عرض شود ما در خصوص بیماران تالاسمی ایران بنده یونس عرب عضو هیئت مدیره و مدیرعامل انجمن تحریم بر بیماران تالاسمی ایران امروز میخوام برای شما صحبت کنم.
In the name of God, my name is Yunus Arab and I'm the president of the Iranian Thalassemia organization or society in Iran.
تالاسمی یک بیماری مادرزادی خونی است که با عوارضی وارده بر طحال و تغییرات استخوانی همراه است. این یک بیماری ژنتیکی است که بر بلایی از تالاسمی دارد و به عنوان یکی از مراکز اصلی این بیماری توصیف می شود. تقریباً 23,000 ایرانی مبتلا به تالاسمی نوع ماژور هستند.
Thalassemia is a congenital blood disease that is associated with complications on the spleen and bone changes. It is a genetic disease that affects a person's body's ability to produce hemoglobin and healthy red blood cells. Compared to most countries, Iran has a high prevalence of thalassemia and is described as one of the main centers of this disease. Approximately 23,000 Iranians have thalassemia.
داروهای مورد نیاز بیماران تالاسمی ایران و شرکت‌های تولید کننده آن رو میخوام اشاره کنم. مهمترین پروتکل درمانی تالاسمی شامل تزریق مادام العمر واحدهای خونی سازگار در فواصل زمانی منظم و استفاده از داروی آهن‌زدا برای کنترل میزان آهن رسوب شده در بدن بیمار به واسطه تزریق خون است. در صورت عدم استفاده از داروهای ضد آهن، بیماران ممکن است به بیماری‌های ثانویه مانند دیابت، پوکی استخوان، نارسایی کلیه، مشکلات قلبی و کبدی و غیره مبتلا شوند. نوارتیس یک شرکت داروسازی مستقر در کشور سوئیس است که محصولات پزشکی را تولید می‌کند. این محصولات شامل داروهایی با دفروکسامین و دفراسیروکس می‌شود که بار آهن را در خون کاهش داده درمان استفاده می‌شوند. نوارتیس تامین کننده اغلب این داروها در سطح جهان است. راکت نیز یک شرکت مستقر در فرانسه است. این شرکت مواد دارویی تولید می‌کند که در تولید داروهای تالاسمی استفاده می‌شود و در گذشته این مواد را به ایران عرضه کرده است.
The most important treatment protocol for thalassemia includes the lifelong injection of compatible blood units at regular intervals and the use of iron-releasing drugs to control the amount of iron deposited in the patient's body through blood transfusions. If anti-iron drugs are not used and are not available, patients may develop secondary diseases such as diabetes, osteoporosis, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing these, kidney failure, heart and liver problems. Novartis is a pharmaceutical company based in Switzerland that manufactures medical products. These products include drugs with certain needed material in them, which I can't pronounce the terms, which reduce the iron load in the blood and are used for treatment. Novartis is a global supplier of most of these drugs. Roquette is also a company based in France. This company produces pharmaceutical materials that are used in the production of thalassemia drugs and has supplied these materials to Iran in the past.
تحریم‌های یکجانبه آمریکا و آثار آن بر دسترسی بیماران تالاسمی ایرانی به دارو اساس تحریم آمریکا در سال 2018 بر اساس فرمان اجرایی 13846 که در ارتباط با خروج آمریکا از برنامه جامع اقدام مشترک برجام صادر شد، تحریم‌های یک جانبه علیه ایران را مجدداً اعمال کرد و متعاقباً تحریم‌های خود را علیه کشور ما گسترش داد. تأثیر کامل تحریم‌های ایالات متحده در ایران با رعایت بیش از حد و قابل توجهی در مقیاس جهانی که ناشی از رویه‌های پیچیده، وقتگیر و یا پرهزینه است تشدید می‌شود. اجرای فراسرزمینی ترس از عمدی مرتبط با تحریم‌ها برای تراکنش‌های مالی برای کالاها و خدمات از جمله کالاهای بشردوستانه مانند دارو که اساساً باید از حوزه تحریم‌ها مستثنا باشند، از جمله ویژگی‌های اقدامات تحریمی علیه ایران است. از زمان اعمال مجدد تحریم‌های آمریکا، ایران با عدم دسترسی به داروهای درمان تالاسمی و اختلال در درمان این بیماران مواجه بوده است. این امر منجر به افزایش بیماری‌های ثانویه و مرگ و میر در بین بیماران تالاسمی ایران شده است. نرخ مرگ و میر بیماران تالاسمی که در گذشته به صورت سالیانه حدود 25 الی 30 نفر بود، در سال 2018 تا 2021 به حدود 120 تا 150 نفر افزایش یافته است.
In 2018, the United States of America reimposed court sanctions regimes on Iran based on Executive Order 13846, which was issued in connection with the withdrawal of U.S. from the JCPOA. And right after this, there was what came to be known as maximum pressure, subsequently extended sanctions regime imposed on Iran. The full impact of U.S. sanctions on Iran was worsened by significant overcompliance on a global scale, resulting from complex, time-consuming, and costly procedures, extraterritorial enforcement, and fear of punishment for those who violate U.S. sanctions and evade sanctions, and sanctions-related barriers in general to financial transactions for goods and services, including humanitarian goods such as medicine, which should really be excluded from the scope of sanctions, and they claim that they are, constitute the features of sanctions measures against Iran. Since the reimposition of sanctions, Iran has had to face lack of access to thalassemia treatment drugs and distribution of these drugs in the treatment of our patients. This has led to an increase in secondary diseases in these patients and mortality among Iranian thalassemia patients. The death rate of thalassemia patients, according to our data, which was in the past about 25 to 30 people per year, has increased to about 120 to 150 people in between 2018 and 2021.
نوارتیس در حال حاضر از ارائه برخی از داروهای تالاسمی به ایران در اواسط سال 2022 شرکت تابعی نوارتیس به شرکت مداوا اطلاع داد که سفارشی که در سال 2021 برای گرانول جید نیو ارسال شده بود به دلیل یک تصمیم داخلی و در آینده قابل پیش‌بینی نمی‌تواند انجام شود. در چارچوب تحریم‌های آمریکا، شرکت فرانسوی روکت نیز به یک شرکت ایرانی که با آن تجارت داشت توصیه کرد که همکاری با ایران را قطع خواهد کرد.
Novartis is a global healthcare company, currently refuses to provide some of the thalassemia drugs to Iran. In mid-2022, the Novartis subsidiary company, which is called MedVA, that placed an order in 2001 for a specific medicine that we needed. They could not be fulfilled. They could not give us or sell to us or conduct any business with us. And they said that is going to be the case for a foreseeable future due to an internal decision. In the framework of the American sanctions, also, the French company Rakut, it's a food and nutrition company, also advised an Iranian company with which it did business before that it will stop cooperation with Iran.
حق بر سلامتی بارها در موافقتنامه‌ها و اعلامیه‌های بین‌المللی از جمله میثاق بین‌المللی حقوق اقتصادی، اجتماعی و فرهنگی که آمریکا آن را در تاریخ 5 اکتبر 1997 شناسایی شده است، این حق امروز در قامت یک تعهد عرفی بین‌المللی دولت‌ها را تضمین و اجرا موظف می‌کند. حق هر کس برای برخورداری از بالاترین استانداردهای قابل دستیابی در زمینه سلامت جسمی و روانی مندرج در اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر اهمیت سلامت و رفاه هر فرد را مورد شناسایی قرار می‌دهد. حق حیات که ارتباط نزدیکی با حق سلامتی دارد در میثاق بین‌المللی حقوق مدنی و سیاسی که توسط ایالات متحده آمریکا در تاریخ 8 ژوئن 1992 تصویب شد و همچنین در اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر مورد شناسایی قرار گرفته است.
The right to health has been recognized many times in the international agreements, international treaties, and declarations, including the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which was recognized by the US on October 5, 1997. Today, this right is an international customary obligation that requires governments to guarantee and implement it. The right of everyone to enjoy the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, containing as guaranteed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, recognizes the importance of health and well-being of every person. The right to life, which is closely related to the right to health, is recognized in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ratified by the U.S. on June 1992, and also in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
انکار یا ایجاد ممانعت بر دسترسی به مراقبت‌های بهداشتی که می‌تواند شامل ممانعت از دسترسی به یک درمان پزشکی خاص یا ایجاد مانع در آن باشد، نقض حق بر سلامتی تلقی می‌شود. معافیت‌های تحریم‌های ایالات متحده آمریکا علیه ایران در حوزه‌هایی مانند غذا و دارو عملاً به شعاری پوشالی تبدیل شده که در عرصه عمل به دلیل تحریم‌های بانکی و حمل و نقل به هیچ عنوان اجرا نمی شود. این نوع از موانع بر سر راه مراقبت‌های بهداشتی همچنین به عنوان نوعی رفتار غیر انسانی در نظر گرفته شده که بر اساس اعلامیه جهانی حقوق بشر، میثاق بین‌المللی حقوق مدنی و سیاسی و کنوانسیون منع شکنجه و سایر رفتارهای ظالمانه غیر انسانی یا تحقیرآمیز که ایالات متحده آمریکا آن را در تاریخ 21 اکتبر 1994 تصویب کرد ممنوع است.
Denying or hindering access to healthcare, which can include denying or hindering access to a specific medical treatment, is considered a violation of the right to health. Exemptions from the sanctions regimes of the US against Iran in areas such as food and medicine have practically become a fake slogan that is not implemented in practice due to the banking and transportation sanctions that are separately imposed. This type of obstacles on the way to healthcare is also considered as a type of inhumane treatment based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatments, all of which the United States has ratified. As the former UN Special Rapporteur on the Prohibition of Torture has pointed out, inhumane treatments can include the practical denial of medication in cases where patients suffer as a result of not receiving them.
همانطور که گزارشگر ویژه سابق سازمان ملل در مورد منع شکنجه و سایر رفتارها یا مجازات‌های ظالمانه غیر انسانی یا تحقیرآمیز اشاره کرده است. رفتار غیر انسانی می‌تواند شامل انکار عملی دادن دارو در مواردی باشد که بیماران در نتیجه نرسیدن آن دچار رنج می‌شوند.
لطفاً ادامه بدین جناب عرب.
همچنین دولت‌ها موظفند تضمین نمایند فعالیت‌های تحت صلاحیت یا کنترل آنها از جمله توسط اشخاص ثالث منجر به نقض حقوق بشر نشود. از آن جایی که اشخاص ثالث ممکن است شرکت‌های تجاری باشند که توسط دولت آمریکا ملزم به رعایت تحریم‌های ایالات متحده آمریکا شده‌اند، تعهد به جلوگیری از نقض حقوق بشر در وضع و اجرای تحریم‌ها باید مد نظر قرار گیرد.
Governments are also obligated to ensure that activities under their jurisdiction or control, including by third parties, do not lead to human rights violations, because third parties may do business, commercial activities under U.S. jurisdiction. They need to comply with United States sanctions. The obligation to prevent human rights violation must be an important consideration when we're talking about these issues.
بر اساس اسناد موجود، شرکت‌های پزشکی علیرغم معافیت‌های تحریم‌ها برای کالاهای بشردوستانه صادره توسط وزارت خزانه‌داری آمریکا به دلیل فروش موارد اندک تجهیزات پزشکی به ایران تحت پیگرد قانونی قرار گرفتند. بانک‌ها و سایر مشارکت کنندگان در زنجیره تأمین داروهای ضروری به دلیل پیچیدگی تحریم‌ها و اجرای تهاجمی و شدید آنها توسط ایالات متحده آمریکا از ایفای نقش خود در ارائه دارو به ایران خودداری کردند.
According to the available documents that we have, medical companies have been prosecuted for selling small amounts of medical equipment to Iran, despite the sanctions exemptions for humanitarian goods issued by the U.S. Treasury Department. Banks and other participants in the supply chain of essential medicines have also refused to play their role in providing medicines to Iran due to the complexity of sanctions and what the conditions that it creates for them, and their aggressive and strict implementation by the U.S. government.
اکنون میخوام چند مصداق از تضییع حقوق بنیادین بشری بیماران تالاسمی ایران به واسطه نرسیدن دارو اشاره کنم. آقای غلامرضا میرزایی، بیمار تالاسمی ماژور که هر 3 هفته 3 واحد خون تزریق میکند و پس از تزریق خون به دلیل بالا رفتن میزان فرتین خون باید از داروهای آهنزدا، جیدنیو و دسپرال استفاده کنند، عدم دسترسی به داروهای آهنزدای او و دوستانش را با بحران‌های متعددی از بیماری فیزیکی نظیر بیماری کلیوی و قلبی، کبد چرب و پوکی و استخوان گرفته تا بیماری روحی مانند افسردگی و عدم امید به ادامه حیات و همچنین ایجاد نگرانی و افسردگی در خانواده‌ها مواجه ساخته است. غلامرضا میرزایی، ورزشکار و کوهنورد حرفه‌ای که پیش از این موفق به فتح چندین قله شده بود، اکنون به دلیل عدم دسترسی به دارو نه تنها قادر به ادامه فعالیت ورزشی خود نیست، بلکه شغل خود را نیز به دلیل ناتوانی مفرط از دست داده است.
I'm going to provide some cases that we deal with individual examples of violation of fundamental human rights of Iranian thalassemia patients due to the lack of medicine. Mr. Ghulamreza Mirzai is one of our patients, a thalassemia major patient who injects 3 units of blood every 3 weeks. And after blood transfusion due to high blood level, he must use iron removal drugs. The lack of access to iron removal drugs has made him and his friends, who are also some of which are also dealing with thalassemia, face many crises, from physical illness such as kidney and heart disease, liver issues, and other mental illness such as depression and lack of hope to continue life, as well as causing depression for and just stressful situations for their families. Ghulamreza was a professional athlete, and he used to go to the mountains and climb mountains, and he succeeded in conquering several peaks, but unfortunately he is now not only unable to continue his sport activities due to lack of access to medicine, but also lost his job due to extreme disability.
عاطفه زاهدیان و مرحوم ناصر میرنژاد سال 1389 ازدواج کردند و در رابطه با بیماری ناصر هیچ گونه مشکلی وجود نداشت تا اینکه تحریم‌های دارویی آغاز و ارائه داروی رایگان در بیمارستان قطع شد. در ابتدا به دلیل قیمت بالا دسترسی به داروهای مورد نیاز برای آنها دشوار و به تدریج این کار برای آنها غیر ممکن شد. ناصر میرنژاد به دلیل عدم دسترسی به دارو جان خود را از دست داد و این خانواده بدون سرپرست باقی ماند. اکنون این مادر و دختر که به دلیل وضع مالی نامناسب تحت پوشش هیچ بیمه‌ای قرار نگرفته بودند، با مشکلات مالی و روحی روبرو هستند.
Atef Zahedian and Nasser Mirnejad, thank you, got married in years ago, and there were no problems related to Nasser's illness until the drug embargo started and the provision of free medicine that was being provided in the hospitals in Iran before sanctions got discontinued because of the lack of access. At first, due to the high price, it was very difficult for them to access the necessary medicine, and it just gradually became impossible for them to access it. Nasser died due to lack of access to medicine that he needed, and his family, including his wife and his daughter, are left behind now. They are not covered by any insurance due to their poor financial situation, and they are facing financial, physical, and mental health problems right now.
میلاد بخشنده از استان فارس دارای مدرک فوق لیسانس است، اما به دلیل بیماری تالاسمی و دریافت معافیت پزشکی از نظام وظیفه درخواست‌های شغلی وی مردود اعلام می‌شوند. پس از یافتن داروی خوراکی یا تزریقی با دشواری دارو استفاده شده و با بدن آن سازگار می‌شود، اما پس از مدتی آن دارو نایاب می‌شود. مادر و پدر میلاد بیمار هستند و بنابراین قادر به پرستاری از وی نیستند. این خانواده با 3 بیمار اکنون با هزینه‌های کمرشکن بیماری مواجه هستند. افزایش سایز طحال، رسوب در قلب و کبد، سنگ کلیه و سنگ کیسه صفرا از مشکلاتی هستند که میلاد با آنها روبروست. علاوه بر درد طاقت فرسا و عدم دسترسی به دارو و هزینه درمان این بیماری، مشکلات دیگری چون بیکاری، هزینه مسکن و غذا نیز بر مشکلات آنها می‌افزاید.
Milad Bakhshande from Fars province in Iran. He has a master's degree, but due to his thalassemia and receiving a medical exemption from the military service, his job applications are just rejected widely. After finding a drug, with difficulty, the drug is used and the body adapts to it. But after a while, that drugs become rare. So he didn't have access to the medicine that he was used to and he was using. Milad's mother and father are both sick and therefore unable to nurse him. This family with 3 patients is now facing the backbreaking cost of this disease. An increase in the size of his spleen, deposits in the heart and liver, kidney stones, and gallbladder stones are some of the problems that Milad is currently facing. In addition to excruciating pain and the lack of access to medicine and the cost of treating this disease, other problems such as unemployment, housing, and food cost also add to their problems.
مهدی هوشمند ساکن تهران، متولد 1365 و دارای مدرک کارشناسی حسابداری است. وی دارای 7 سال سابقه حسابرسی در مؤسسات خصوصی و ذی‌حسابی و بازرس نهادهای دولتی میباشد. اما متاسفانه به دلیل پیشرفت بیماری تالاسمی بسیاری از موقعیت‌های شغلی برتر را از دست داد. در سال 1391 موفق به کسب رتبه دوم بازرسی و حسابرسی در کشور شد. اما در چند سال اخیر عدم دسترسی به دارو و پیشرفت بیماری او حیات حرفه‌ای او را تحت شعاع قرار داده و مانع ارتقاء وی شده است. علاوه بر موانع شغلی و فعالیت‌های اجتماعی، این بیماری زندگی شخصی او مانند ازدواج را نیز متأثر کرده است. این بیماران می‌توانند مانند مردم عادی زندگی کنند، تنها به شرط استفاده از داروهای آهن‌زدا. اما عدم دسترسی به این داروها زندگی آنها را دگرگون و آنها را به مردگانی متحرک تبدیل می‌سازد.
The final case is Mehdi Houshmand from Tehran. He's in his 30s and he has a bachelor's degree in accounting. He has 7 years of auditing experience in private and public institutions and inspecting government institutions. But unfortunately, due to the progress of thalassemia, he lost many top job positions that he had. In 2013, he succeeded in getting the 2nd rank in inspection and audit in a competition, I guess. But in the last few years, the lack of access to medicine and the progress of his disease have overshadowed his personal and professional life and prevented his promotion. In addition to obstacles in his career and social activities, this disease also affected his personal life, including but not limited to marriage.
صحبت‌های انجمنی به پایان رسید، اما فرصت دارم 2-3 جمله در خصوص خودم صحبت بکنم.
حتما بفرمایید جناب.
بله. عرض شود که من از خانم‌ها و آقایان میخوام به این نکات خیلی توجه بکنم. من به عنوان الان صحبت‌هام رو در قالب یک بیمار تالاسمی میخوام عرض کنم و نه مدیر انجمن تالاسمی ایران.
Please, I would like to draw your attention to this part and last part of my testimony because I would like to speak as a patient of thalassemia myself and not as the president of the Thalassemia Society. So please pay close attention to this part.
من به دلیل اینکه متولد خوزستان هستم و در یک شهر مرزی در خوزستان متولد شدم، در دهه 60 که زمانی که جنگ عراق علیه ایران بود، سختی‌های زیادی چون در ابتدای زندگی مجبور بودیم تزریق خون انجام بدیم کشیدیم. در اون دوره که حدود فکر می‌کنم 5 سال از ابتدایی ترین عمرم رو زیر موشک و خمپاره گذروندیم، سفری کردم و تجربه تلخی از درمان در اون شرایط جنگی رو داشتم.
Wow. So I was born in Khuzestan in a southern province in Iran, and when I was born, Iran was already under attack, a Western-sponsored military attack through Iraq. During this conflict, I spent 5 years at the beginning of my life as a thalassemia patient when I was born, and it was a devastating condition for me as a newborn, for my family, to make sure that I get the blood and the care that I needed. And I experienced this as an Iranian also under military attack in addition to the existing economic attack.
این توضیح رو به این خاطر دادم که در بدترین شرایطی که کشورم مورد هجوم و جنگ قرار داشت، ما مشکلات خاصی به لحاظ دارویی و درمانی واقعا نداشتیم. اما طی 4-5 سال گذشته که تحریم ها برگشتن، واقعا یک جنگ نامرئی علیه بیماران تالاسمی ایران و بهترین دوستانم شکل گرفت که باعث تا امروز، یعنی از می 2018 تا امروز، باعث مرگ 661 بیمار تالاسمی در ایران شد.
I could argue, having experienced that, I could argue that we as thalassemia patients had better access to healthcare and medicine that we needed at the time of war than what we have right now under sanctions. Our conditions and access to the care that we need has gotten worse even after the war ended. I have lost, or we have lost 661 Iranian patients of thalassemia recently.
امروز من در آستانه 39 سالگی در ایران قرار دارم و ولی مانند 23,000 بیمار تالاسمی در ایران امیدی به درمان در آینده ندارم، به دلیل اینکه داروهای من مانند تمامی بیماران تالاسمی در نقاط مختلف کشور در دسترس نیست و محدود شده و این فکر میکنم وحشیانه ترین نوع بیرحمی علیه آسیب پذیرترین قشر یک ملت است.
I am almost 39 years old and I, alongside the 23,000 of Iranian thalassemia patients, right now are experiencing devastating conditions to access health, and we have no hope that our conditions are going to get any better anytime soon. And we are enraged and devastated by the conditions and the violence that is being imposed upon us.
من در پایان از تمامی عزیزان که صحبتام رو گوش دادن تشکر میکنم و خواهش میکنم هر کاری که در زمینه کمک به بیماران تالاسمی ایران از دستشون برمیاد انجام بدن تا ما بتونیم بالاخره مانند افراد طبیعی حق حیات داشته باشیم و به زندگی عادیمون برگردیم.
I missed this from the last part. This is the translator speaking. We would like to ask you that you bring accountability to these, and you and we should be allowed to have normal conditions of living, respected and respect for our right to health, right to living. We should be respected. We should live in dignity, and we should live in normal conditions like anyone else with this disease elsewhere in the world. And thank you. I conclude my testimony. بسیار ممنونم جناب عرب از شما.
خواهش میکنم. خیلی ممنون از شما.
خیلی ممنون دکتر عرب. خیلی عالی بود. دستون درد نکنه. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Excellent testimony. And we are now to our last speaker. He will be excellent. You may have seen him on PBS and BBC and many other English language news shows. His name is Dr. Sayed Mohammad Marandi. He teaches at the University of Tehran in the American Studies and World Studies program. He's a professor of English literature and Orientalism. He's both a prolific speaker and a prolific scholar. And we welcome you, Dr. Marandi. We know you've waited a long time. We've all waited a long time. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. And while it's been a long wait, but it's also been very painful to listen to the men and women speaking about the hardships that they personally experienced and the hardships that others have experienced as well. The anecdotal examples that they gave are quite devastating, really, when one thinks about it. And we have a country of 85 to 90 million people. Imagine how many more such stories are out there that we know nothing about and we will never know anything about. The attempt to strangulate the Iranian people is, I think, a theme that many will talk about in the future, but I want to make it a bit personal as well. And it reminds me of my own experience, not due to a shortage of medicine, not due to a lack of medical facilities. But in the 1980s, when I was 16 years old, after Saddam Hussein invaded Iran with the support of the United States and the Europeans, I volunteered to fight that war, and I participated in that war until the final days, on and off. Every year I'd spend a few months in the war zone and on the battlefields. During the Khaybar operations, which were in the third year of the war, near the Iranian Nowruz holiday, I was near the battlefield, and two Mirage jets bombed our positions. One jet targeted our unit specifically with 8 rockets. Those rockets contained nerve agents, and I and my friends, my comrades, we were unable to breathe. And that is the first time that I've experienced strangulation. Those chemical weapons were provided to Saddam Hussein by European countries. Germany, more than any other country, is guilty. It was well documented. The Iranian government for years complained. It even sent the injured soldiers to German hospitals so that the German media would see what their government is doing. And of course, the United States and the rest of the Western Bloc gave Saddam Hussein military intelligence and the political cover to get away with such attacks. I was again gassed during the final days of the war with mustard gas. I survived, like many, but of course, many didn't survive, and many now continue to die slowly. Many have died a slow death, but many will die in future a slow death because of the chemical weapons used by Saddam Hussein that were given to him by Western countries. No Western government has been condemned. No Western company has been punished. No apologies have ever been given to Iranians. No compensation has been given to the victims or their families. Nothing. In fact, Western media rarely speaks about the chemical weapons used by Saddam Hussein against Iranians. And the first time actually that this was made an issue was after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And these attacks were used to justify war against Saddam Hussein. Now, the reason why I say this is that I feel that this is war that is being waged upon Iranian people. And the sanctions are like chemical weapons that are whose intentions, they're weapons that are intentionally being used to strangle the whole of the Iranian society. You've heard very well explained examples from the different speakers. Businesses destroyed, jobs destroyed, earnings crashing down, making survival difficult for ordinary people, for women, for men with children, or who have to help their parents and family members. Families are devastated, or were devastated, and continue to be devastated. On the other hand, we see how factories have to cut costs. They have to cut corners. As was pointed out, they would have to carry out repairs without the necessary tools that would protect the workers, to protect them from dangerous gases and from other elements that can kill them or can maim them or can devastate them and their families and their colleagues, thus leading to many deaths, many maimed people who have to be then taken care of by the country's healthcare system, a healthcare system burdened by sanctions. This is probably the most hypocritical of all the sanctions that are directed at ordinary Iranians. Sanctions that are intended to make people suffer as much as possible. Why do I say that the intention is to make people suffer as much as possible? Because Obama said so. He called them crippling sanctions. He was the first person to impose maximum pressure sanctions. He said they are crippling. They were intended, therefore, to cripple Iranian society. Trump called them brutal sanctions. They were intended to brutalize Iranians and Iranian society. And of course, as one of the speakers correctly pointed out, Biden simply pursued Trump's policies. So when Trump intended to brutalize Iranians, that meant that Biden too is attempting to brutalize Iranians. And they do so with success, not the sort of success that they seek. Their attempts are to make life so painful and to make people suffer so much that people would rise up in desperation. And of course, that's when the terrorist organizations and the media channels funded by Western countries come into play to create division, tension in the country, so that people who are living under sanctions cannot live with safety and security either. So it goes back to my experience in the war. People were strangled during the war, not just combatants. Roughly 6,000 or so Iraqis in Halabja died, almost all of them within minutes, due to Saddam Hussein's chemical weapons. Imagine the number of Iranians that have died directly or indirectly as a result of the sanctions in silence. We will never hear their stories because there are not enough people on this panel or any panel, and there's not enough time in this world to give all their stories the necessary coverage. So, but the most hypocritical part of all of this is when pharmaceutical companies in the West who are not sanctioned, they refuse to cooperate with Iran. They refuse to provide medicine. They refuse to provide the necessary supplies. And they say so in letters. You speak to Iranians in the pharmaceutical industry, in the Ministry of Health, they say this openly, that these companies live in fear. Western banks live in fear of sanctions. They live in fear of being punished because they may carry out a transaction to provide Iran with some sort of supply that will cause them trouble and make them lose a huge amount of money. So the American government very, very carefully has constructed a sanctions regime where all Iranians are sanctioned, but they also devise it in a way so that they can prevent Iranians from receiving their most fundamental needs without being blamed. That is probably the most evil and fiendish crime that I can think of. To kill innocent people and to pretend that you're innocent. And the irony is that at the same time they lecture Iran and other sanctioned countries. I was invited recently to Venezuela, and I saw the similar conditions that Venezuelans would have to tolerate. And while I was there, I read a Western media report about how the Venezuelan model had failed. The irony, of course, is that this is supposedly the free media in the West that says this, but it simply mimics government talking points. The US government sets its boots on the throat of the people of Venezuela, and then it says, why can't you breathe? They put their boots on the necks of Iranians, and they ask, why can't Iranians breathe normally? I have a firm belief that those countries that have carried out these atrocities against Iran will pay in one way or form. That's my personal belief. And these atrocities, these crimes against humanity are so widespread across the global South that people recognize, outside of the Western world, people recognize what's going on. Libya, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Venezuela, Cuba, all these examples, all these people have a similar history with the United States. But my objective here and the objective of my good friends and colleagues who are involved in this panel are to point out or to help you better understand what is going on in Iran and, of course, in the global South, so that Western audiences can have a better understanding of the reality behind the policies of their governments. And while I don't have great expectations that justice will be served through the rule of law and through the courthouses, but I believe that through the good work of all those people who have sanity and morality, who are sane and moral human beings, that in the eyes of the global public opinion, the truth will come out, and those who created or brought about these atrocities will be punished in the eyes of global public opinion. I apologize for speaking at length, and I again thank those friends of ours who've organized this program. Thank you.
Dr. Marandi, thank you very much. That was very powerful. Matteo, I see you have your hand up. Is that right? No? Okay. We are now going to move into the question and answer portion of the discussion. The jurors will ask the witnesses questions. What I'm going to do is go through the jurors one by one. If you do not have a question, just feel free to pass. But if you do have a question, then we will translate for the witnesses and move forward. We have lost a few of the witnesses and a few of the jurors. They had time commitments, but we have enough people to keep going. We just lost Marjorie, so I'm going to move to Maria. Maria, are you on? Maria LaHood from Center for Constitutional Rights.
I am sorry, I was having trouble getting up here. Thank you to the witnesses for that really horrific and powerful testimony. We appreciate it very much. My question, I mean, I understand how the cost and transport issues of sanctions and the fear of sanctions all lead to the problems with medical treatments. I'm wondering if there's something specific about the medical treatments for EB or for thalassemia that impact the treatments more, or is this, can we presume, I mean, I understand how some of the treatments for cancer are nuclear medicine, and that might be an additional factor. Can we assume that the treatments for various illnesses besides these that we've heard about today are also negatively impacted by sanctions, so that it impacts the entire public health realm? Or is there something specific about the conditions that we've been hearing about that lead to a broader impact? If that makes sense? Thank you.
Should I go ahead and translate, or do we want to take some questions and then? You're muted, Niraja.
Go ahead and translate, Elia John.
All right. سوال این هست که آیا راجع به کیس هایی که امروز شنیدیم، کیس های بیمارانی که امروز شنیدیم از جمله بیماران تالاسمی و بیماران EB، آیا این موضوعات مخصوص به این دو کیس از بیماران هستند یا شرایطی که تحریم به وجود آورده شرایط رو برای همه بیماران از جمله بیمارانی که غیر از تالاسمیا و EB هستن برای کشور مختل کرده، برای بیماران کشور مختل کرده دسترسیشون به دارو و به پروسه سلامت و بهداشت؟
Any of the witnesses who'd like to answer, please try to limit your remarks to 2 to 3 minutes each.
لطفاً در 1 تا 2 دقیقه پاسخ بدید.
Dr. Ada?
Leila, I think I heard Leila.
Oh, Leila, okay. Khanum Enayati, and then Dr. Ada.
ایشون و
صداتون نمیاد لیلا جون، ببخشید صداتون نمیاد. اگه میشه به هلیا جون زنگ بزنین، میتونین تلفنی بهشون زنگ بزنین واتساپ، بعد هلیا جون ترجمه میکنه براتون.
الان صدای من میاد؟
الان میاد. آره
پس مجدد عرض میکنم من تو پاسخ به این سوال میتونم بگم که بله تمام بیماران رو درگیر کرده. باز یه تجربه شخصی دارم که میخوام به اشتراک بذارم. من مادر همسرم سال گذشته یه بیماری خود ایمنی گرفتن که تمام بدنشون داشت فلج میشد، تا گردن ایشون فلج شده بودن. داروی ایشون داروی IVIG بود و چون این بیماری همزمان با بیماری کووید 19 شده بود و داروی IVIG توی مراحل سخت کووید 19 هم استفاده میشد، به واسطه تحریم ها و به واسطه کمبود و حتی نایاب شدن این دارو بسیار این دارو گرون بود. میخواید این ترجمه بشه تا من ادامه بدم؟
بله مرسی. Yes, I briefly want to say that all of the diseases are impacted by sanction. In one of my other personal experiences, my mother-in-law last year was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that was basically paralyzing her body up to her neck, and the drug that was helpful for this disease specifically is called IVIG, which is also used for severe COVID cases. And because of the sanctions and the lack of existences of IVIG and the higher prices of it, I think that's so far, Dr. Anayati.
هم قیمت این دارو بسیار گرون شده بود، یعنی دارویی که باید با 100,000 تومان یعنی $2 ما تهیه می کردیم، این دارو رو ما با 12 میلیون تومان این دارو رو، یعنی 12 میلیون تومان میشه چند دلار؟ 100,000 تومان 10 میلیون، فکر میکنم میشه 200، یعنی حدود $200 با $2 باید تهیه میکردیم با $200 و به شدت سخت بود پیدا کردن این دارو و اگر ما این دارو رو نمیتونستیم پیدا کنیم و به ایشون برسیم 15 دوز باید استفاده میکردن این دارو رو. ما دوز اولش رو اگر نمیتونستیم پیدا کنیم نهایتاً با هزینه خیلی بالا این دارو رو تهیه کردیم و اگر ما توانایی پرداخت هزینه این دارو رو نداشتیم قطعاً ایشون کاملاً فلج شده بودن و به همین خاطر میگم که تمام بیماران تحت تاثیر قرار گرفتن. حتی سرم گیر نمی اومد. سرم دیگه یه چیز خیلی معمولیه، حتی سرم به سختی گیر می اومد.
Yes, because of how expensive the drug is, for my mother-in-law's case, there needed to be 15 infusions of IVIG for her to be treated. The drug used to be $2, for example. However, because of the sanctions, lack of the drug, the drug was $200 for one dose. And we had to provide 15 doses for my mother-in-law. And if we were not able to afford that, she would have been paralyzed. And another thing that is under like IVs, general IVs are also basically impossible to find and very expensive due to sanctions.
ممنونم.
Thank you.
خیلی ممنون خانم عنایتی. دکتر عرب؟
جانم در خدمتم.
میخواین جواب بدین به سوال ماریا یا نه؟
بله اگر بپرسین من در خدمتم. ببخشید من نبودم.
خواهش میکنم. سوال این بود که آیا این دو کیس EB و تالاسمیا رو که شنیدیم آیا میتونیم جنرالایز کنیم که بقیه بیمارها هم تحت تاثیر شرایط تحریم هستن در ایران یا خیر؟
یعنی به جز بیماری تالاسمی و EB گروه‌های دیگه؟
بله.
ایران تقریبا از سال 76 شروع کرد یک سری بیماران رو خاص اعلام کرد و تمامی خدمات دارویی و درمانی رو برای این بیماران رایگان کرد و پرداخت کرد هزینه هاشون رو. تالاسمی اولین گروه بیماری خاص بود و بعدش
یه لحظه دکتر عرب که هلیا جون ترجمه کنه ببخشید.
باش.
Do you want to do it?
Anita John, go ahead. And 76 is 5th, 6th, 7th.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Basically, since 1997, the Iranian government have categorized as special disease, like some diseases as special diseases, and the government itself provides care and financial aid to access care for those specific diseases. Thalassemia is one of those.
به تدریج گروه‌های دیگه مثل هموفیلی، مثل اوتیسم، مثل ایبی و MS اضافه شدن و امروز این گروه رسیده به بیش از 100 گروه بیماری خاص و نادر.
Over the course of the years, other diseases like MS, OT, and other diseases have been added to this list, and right now we have more than 100 diseases that have been categorized by the Iranian government as special diseases that they provide care for.
در تمامی این گروه‌ها که من ارتباط مستقیم باشون دارم به واسطه همکاری‌های بین NGOها، مشکلات زیادی در زمینه داروها و درمانشون به وجود اومده. اما بخشی از اونها ممکنه نوع اثر تحریم بر اونها متفاوت‌تر باشه نسبت به گروه ما، چون در حوزه تالاسمی دارو اولویت اول درمان هست، اما در بخشی از بیماران مثل اوتیسم آموزش‌ها و بروزرسانی فرآیندهای آموزشی و بروزرسانی کادر درمان برای گرفتن خدمات و همتراز با سایر نقاط دنیا که در زمینه اوتیسم پیشرو هستند، اونها به نحوی دیگه مورد تحریم واقع شده.
I have personal connections through NGOs that I work with every patient, like with people within each categories of these diseases, and I can tell you that all of them have been affected by sanctions in different ways. Thalassemia patients are specifically targeted through the lack of access to medication, but the sanctions can affect the care and the diagnosis and access in other ways. For example, autism, because in Iran we are not able to access the current publications or like be in the global conversation about the ways to care for the disease, like that can affect, for example, autism in that way, but every category is affected differently through sanctions.
در گروه‌های دیگه مثل MPS و CF هم بیماران به شدت دچار مشکلات هستند در زمینه حتی موارد غذایی. نوع غذای خاصی باید برای بعضی از گروه‌های بیماران استفاده بشه که اونها هم مورد تحریم قرار گرفتن. میخوام یه نکته خیلی قابل توجه بهتون بگم. در تالاسمی ما یک استاد دانشگاه رو از ایتالیا آوردیم اینجا برای آموزش پزشکان درمانگر و بعدش ایشون به ما یک ایمیلی زد که دیگه گفت آمریکا به من روادید نداده و من رو برای بحث حضور در مجامع علمی و پزشکی در آمریکا دیگه نپذیرفتن بعد از اینکه من به ایران اومدم و این باعث میشه که دیگه اساتید بزرگ در عرصه این گروه از بیماری ها بترسن از اینکه با ما حتی بیان ارتباط بگیرن و بخوان کمک کنن به بحث ارتقای کیفیت درمان بیماران در ایران.
There are two things. One thing is that like patients with MPS and CF need a specific kind of nutrition to care for their disease, and even those kind of nutritions are like under sanctions. It's impossible to access them. And one important note that I want to make is that in Thalassemia, we brought an Italian doctor a few years ago to speak to doctors specializing for care for thalassemia in Iran. And that doctor like emailed us back and said that his visa, he was not then granted visa by the US to attend his research in the United States and other European countries, and that creates the culture of fear around experts in these areas to even communicate with us or to even like work with us to update our level of care.
اگر مورد خاصی هست من در خدمت.
If there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Maria, do you have any follow-ups? You're on mute.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I think in the interest of time, we should go to other jurors, but maybe we can have more follow-up after. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Prabhat?
No, thanks. I'd like to pass, but I'd just like to thank the various witnesses for the excellent evidence that they have provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhat.
تشکر میکنم از تمام شاهدین محترم برای شواهد عالی و پرزنتیشن عالی که ارائه کردیم.
Victor, do you have any questions?
I will just echo Prabhat's sentiments about the excellent presentations, and I will pass. I had a question in the chat room, but it was answered by subsequent presenters, so I'm fine.
Thank you very much, Victor. Are there any questions from our rapporteurs? I know time is of the essence. Dr. Marandi, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a brief point, and that is that the punishment that is imposed on ordinary Iranians is multi-layered. On the one hand, because of the sanctions, wages go down. As was pointed out by my colleagues, I just want to put all these together in a small package. Wages go down or people lose jobs. Because of the problems with the government's budget, government insurance becomes less effective. On the other hand, medicine becomes more expensive. The equipment in hospitals become more expensive. So it becomes less accessible. Because of the sanctions on the banking system, the Iranian government often, first of all, does not have enough money to pay for supplies, whether it's medicine or the equipment and goods necessary to produce Iranian medicine. So sometimes the Iranian factories that produce medicine, they have shortages and they can't supply in time. Sometimes the government has the money and it tries to send the money, but because of the sanctions, it doesn't get to the destination in time and the supplies therefore come late again. So then you suddenly have huge shortages of different types of medicine across the country. So you have these a hike in prices. You have people having greater difficulty in accessing hospitals and medicine, and that makes life increasingly difficult for everyone. And I'd just like to give a final example on the coronavirus. When the coronavirus broke out, Iran had roughly $7 billion in Korean banks. That was Iranian money, which was due to fuel and oil that the Korean government and the Korean companies had purchased and used in their factories and homes. So Iran had $7 billion. The Korean government refused, under orders from Washington, to allow Iran to use that money to purchase gas masks. I'm thinking about the war again. And that's also another, we were sanctioned during the 1980s. While Saddam was giving chemical weapons, we were prevented from purchasing gas masks and the equipment to fight against chemical weapons. But that's another story. Masks were denied to the Iranians by the Korean government because they would not allow Iran access to its wealth. Test kits, when the virus broke out, Iran wanted to purchase them, but they couldn't use their money because of the sanctions. Purchasing all the different supplies that were used during the outbreak and the first few months were devastating for Iran. All my Iranian colleagues here remember how bad the coronavirus hit the country. And our country was one of the first countries to be hit by this virus. And so when Iran couldn't purchase vaccines, Iran gave the money. It gave, I think, $200 million for vaccines, but they refused to give Iran the vaccines. And then finally, when Iran tried to produce their own vaccines, the companies that were producing the vaccines were sanctioned. So it's a very painful story, and I shouldn't take up more of your time, but I just think if we put all the pieces together, it just shows how devastating it is for each and every person, even people who survive, even people who have some illness and go to the hospital and come out. The cost becomes so much more expensive. And so it has a huge long-term impact on all families. Just like food does. Food becomes more expensive. Wages are down. So the pain is overwhelming. It's across the country, and it continues as we speak.
Dr. Manandi, I have a follow-up question, especially since you just visited Venezuela. At our opening, we held an opening of the tribunal in New York City in January, and we had both Cuban and Venezuelan diplomats speak. And I got the sense that, and I'm wondering if I'm correct or not, that the nations that have oil and gas resources, despite the severity of the sanctions regime against Iran, nations like Iran and like Venezuela are actually faring better than small nations like Cuba. And so that's my first question. Is that correct, or is that an incorrect assumption? And we'll know more once we do the Cuba hearing in a few months or a few weeks. The second question is, based on what you saw in Venezuela, how do you perceive the experience of Iranians and Venezuelans? Is there different similarities?
In some respects, you're absolutely correct. It's more difficult for countries such as Cuba, because Iran and Venezuela, and especially Iran, they were able to sell oil, limited amounts of oil, at a discounted price. And that helped. But from a different perspective, it's even more painful perhaps for Venezuelans and Iranians, because the standard of living in these countries were also much higher. And the sudden collapse in the standards of living of people from these different oil-producing countries. And it's interesting that so many oil-producing countries have been targeted. Libya destroyed, Iraq invaded and destroyed. Iran, of course, sanctioned. Syria, an oil-producing country. Right now, the areas that produce oil are controlled by the United States. 1/3 of the country is occupied, and the U.S. is taking the oil. Sudan went through a civil war. The oil-rich areas were separated from Sudan. Venezuela, of course, as you pointed out, an oil-producing country. So it's very interesting that so many of these countries that are targeted are in fact energy producers. But when I went to Venezuela, I felt that the government, sort of like in Iran, that the government was learning to circumvent the sanctions, but also, I think more importantly, because of the conflict in Europe and the fact that the Russian oil and gas industries have been sanctioned, Iran and Venezuela now have better ability to sell their oil, and therefore things have improved to a degree. But still, as I said earlier on, when Iran had funding in the past, such as to purchase vaccines, they were unable to do so. They gave the money, or for example, moving the funding from A to B is in many cases virtually impossible. Or many of the pharmaceutical companies and other companies as well in other areas, when the Americans speak of dual-use technology, it is so vague and broad that many machines and much of the equipment used even in hospitals cannot be purchased. because it's called dual-use technology by the United States. And it is done intentionally so. So while in certain respects things are better than in countries like Cuba, and of course Cuba has the suffering in Cuba has been going on much longer as well. The Cubans of my age, I think, were experiencing these sanctions all their lives. So all these different countries all have their own different experiences. But what I think is common among all of them is that these sanctions are so carefully structured and designed. There's a book called The Art of Sanctions written by one of the people who designed the sanctions against Iran. It's called an art, how to destroy a people, to strangle a nation, to cause mass suffering across different lands in the world. It's published in the United States as The Art of Sanctions, and this person, I met him at a conference in Doha, very well respected among, I refused to speak with him, but very well respected among all his peers that were from Europe and the United States. And that's sadly the state of affairs. I'm sorry if my response is not very clear, and if it's a bit, it's not well structured, but I think you got what I was trying to say.
No need to apologize. Thank you very much. I think we have a couple of questions from our rapporteurs, and then just so people know, somebody maybe can translate this for the witnesses. After each hearing, we produce a findings document. The rapporteurs work in collaboration with the jurors to produce this document. And then this findings document will be used by the jurors at the end of the tribunal in July to create a verdict against the United States and possibly other entities as well. And Karina Mullen is our lead rapporteur. She's here. Mateo Capasso is one of our rapporteurs for Asia. Does somebody want to translate this for the witnesses?
For sure. ما میخوایم یادآوری کنیم که در ماه جولای در تابستان که آخرین جلسه دادگاه رو برگزار می‌کنیم، تمام ریپورت ها رو درباره کشورهای مختلف پابلش می‌کنیم و از همه داده هایی که با ما استفاده شده برای حکم نهایی دادگاه استفاده خواهیم کرد، از جمله شهادت هایی که امروز ارائه شد و بعدش برای اینکه پرونده هایی رو با تیم حقوقیمون از این مدارک استفاده کنیم و پرونده های حقوقی رو باز کنیم علیه آمریکا و یا پتانسیالی پارتنر اروپایی، اینا بررسی خواهند شد. الان 2 تا سوال هست برای فکر میکنم آقای میرغفاری که کورینا و ماتئو از اعضای برگزار کننده و هیئت دادگاه خواهند پرسید.
Karina, go ahead, and then Mateo. Maybe ask back to back, and then Mr. Mirghafari can answer.
Thank you for that, Nina and Helia. And I just want to thank all of the expert witnesses today for your extremely informative and powerful and, as has been said, really devastating testimonies. I have a question for Mr. Mirghafari. Thank you so much for covering the impact of sanctions on the working class. I think that's an area of sanctions, of unilateral economic coercive measures that's often overlooked or underanalyzed, and I really appreciate your testimony. I wanted to ask a question about the role of imperialist labor federations like the AFL-CIO. I was wondering if you could talk a bit, if you have any information about their role in terms of supporting the sanctions or anything that they have done to further their impact on workers, on Iranian workers. And considering the importance, of course, of solidarity to labor organizing, I'm wondering if you could also speak to, if any, instances of solidarity from workers here in the U.S. or in the West more broadly who have expressed solidarity with Iranian workers impacted by sanctions. Thank you.
جناب آقای میرغفاری، سوال برای شماست. اول تشکر کردن از اینکه درباره موضوع مهم کارگران صحبت کردین امروز برای ما. میخوان بدونن که نظر شما راجع به اهمیت و وجود همبستگی سازمان‌های کارگری خارج از ایران نسبت به کاری که شما دارین میکنین و دوستانتون چطوریه؟ آیا نام بردن از AFL-CIO که یکی از نهادهای کارگری هست فکر میکنم در آمریکا، و اینکه آیا شما هیچ همبستگی مفید و غیر ایمپریالیستی تجربه کردین به عنوان نماینده ای از کارگرای پارس جنوبی در کارهایی که داشتین کردین از کارگرای بین‌المللی خارج از ایران یا خیر؟
و AFL-CIO یکی از انجمن کارگران بزرگترین آمریکاست، ولی امپریالیست، یعنی پرو امپریالیسته. بعد کورینا پرسید که رابطه با AFL-CIO بدی خوبی تا حالا داشتین یا حالا میذاریم متیو هم سوال بکنه بعد میتونین جواب بدین.
Thank you everyone for your witness experience and testimony. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Yes, I also have a question for Mr. Mir Tagheri. I wanted to ask if what is the on the ground, considering how much is involved in the struggles, what is the consciousness on the sides of the workers in Iran that this is a struggle that must, must include an anti-imperialist framework. Unfortunately, when facing squeezing labor wages and inflation and everything, there is an immediate reaction towards the government, obviously. But I wonder if there is awareness that there must be a fight against imperialism on this front. And my second question is, if you could, if possible, if you could give us a sense of a little bit more elaborate on how the sanctions have impacted the oil industry. You talk about the difficulties to repair and all that. So to find spare parts, since we've seen this in other hearings like Libya, for example, it would be useful to understand this, and if Iran has found ways to actually find its own ways to avoid these problems, or is still facing it. Thank you.
آقای میرغفاری، سوال دوم متیو این بود که میدونیم که فعالیت کردن مخصوصا در حوزه کارگری کار بسیار سختیه، مخصوصا وقتی ایران هدف حمله های ایمپریالیستی در این سالها بوده و همیشه تهدید علیه حاکمیت ارضی ایران اتفاق افتاده بوده. بنابراین شرایط رو سخت‌تر و پیچیده تر میکنه برای فعالان کارگری که میخوان برای کارشون فعالیت بکنن و شرایطشون رو بهتر کنن برای خودشون و همکارانشون. شما چی جوری این رو نویگیت کردین؟ چی جوری این مسیر رو طی کردین که هم که علیه حمله های ایمپریالیستی ایران مقاومت کنین به عنوان جامعه کارگری، ولی در عین حال پیش ببرین خواسته هاتون رو به عنوان جامعه کارگری. میخواین به این سوال جواب بدین و من بخش دومش رو میگم.
عرض سلام مجدد خدمت حضرات محترم و حاضرین. سوال اول این بود که در واقع ارتباطاتی که ما با سازمان‌های بین‌المللی کار داریم و ارتباطاتی داریم تو بحث حالا پیش بردن قضایای تحریم و آسیبایی که داره با سازمان‌های بین‌المللی کار. درست میگم؟
بله دقیقا.
خب ببینید در واقع ما انجمن‌های صنفی کارگریمون رو از سال 1400 شروع به در واقع طی کردن سلسله مراتب قانونیشون کردیم و تونستیم در 12 پالایشگاه مجتمع گاز پارس جنوبی که غالب بر 15,000 نیروی کار داره انجمن‌های صنفیمون در پالایشگاه شکل بگیره و متعاقب آن اومدیم نهاد بالادستی به وجود آوردیم به عنوان کانون
ببخشید آقای یه لحظه بذارین یکی ترجمه کنه به انگلیسی. ببخشید.
Thank you so much. So basically, from the year 1400, which I think is like early 2000s, in Iran, they have tried to mobilize and unionize 12 sections of the oil refineries that Mr. Mirafari works at, and I got that far. ببخشید آقای میرغفاری میتونید یه بار دیگه تکرار کنید یه ذره از اولتر ولی بقیه‌اش رو ترجمه میکنم.
ببینید ما از سال 1400 انجمن‌های صنفی در 12 پالایشگاه مجتمع گاز پارس جنوبی طی کردن سلسله مراتب قانونیش رو انجام دادیم و تشکیلات کارگری رو به وجود آوردیم.
Yes, so they have started from early 2000 somethings to sorry, this is the translator. I don't know the exact year from Farsi to Miladi, but they have started the legal process of unionizing 12 oil refineries back where they work. ادامه بدین.
این انجمن‌های صنفی برای اولین بار در واقع وزارت نفت و در منطقه ویژه پارس جنوبی شکل گرفتن.
This is the first time that these unions are being formed within the national oil companies and ببخشید اسمش پارسه؟
پارس جنوبی.
پارس جنوبی where Mr.
South Pars Gas Complex.
Yeah, thank you.
South Pars Gas Complex. Yes. و این در واقع انجمن‌ها در حساس‌ترین و استراتژیک‌ترین منطقه اقتصادی و انرژی ایران شکل گرفته.
These unions are being formed within the most strategic and financially important parts of the Iranian economy.
به طوری که پالایشگاه‌های 12گانه بیش از 70% گاز کشور و انرژی کشور رو تامین میکنن.
These 12 refineries that are being part of this union are producing 70% of the natural gas of the country.
و بیش از 40% درآمد ارزی ایران از در واقع این منطقه داره تامین میشه.
And they're producing more than 40% of the Iranian revenue that is being produced in the country.
ما به خاطر اینکه بتونیم در واقع انجمن‌های صنفی با همدیگه وحدت رویه به وجود بیاریم تصمیم گرفتیم کانون انجمن‌های صنفی کارگران پالایشگاه گاز استان بوشهر رو تشکیل بدیم و یک اتحادیه بالادستی به وجود آوردیم.
In order to organize and unionize their efforts, they have started the Bushehr Oil Refinery Union organization that will be organizing all these 12 different sectors.
و تجربه در واقع تا الان تجربه ارتباط گرفتن با تشکلات کارگری بین المللی و کشورهای دیگه نداشتیم و این تجربه برای ما هنوز اتفاق نیفتاده.
And thus far we haven't had the experience of either receiving solidarity or communication with the international unions.
ولی در مورد در واقع تهدیدهای حاکمیت ایران توسط امپریالیسم بین المللی و در رأس اون آمریکا
But in regards to the imperialist efforts of the US towards Iran,
تا الان ما تمام تلاش و سعیمون کردیم که مطالبات مجموعمون کاملا صنفی بمونه و به هیچ عنوان وارد بازی‌های سیاسی نشدیم، چه حالا سیاست‌های داخلی خود ایران چه سیاست‌های خارجی.
we have tried to keep our efforts and our points local for the workers itself and not engage in political avenues, both international or within the Iranian politics.
و سعی کردیم فقط به سمت رفاه و بهبود شرایط مجموعه خودمون حرکت کنیم و به هیچ عنوان وارد بازی‌های سیاسی تا الان نشدیم.
And our main efforts have been to raise the living experiences of our workers within our union, and thus have really stayed away from engaging in anything political.
و بهترین راهکار برای خروج از وضعیت فعلی و در واقع خروج از مقابله با سیاست‌های نظام سرمایه‌داری اون در واقع راهنمودهای دینی که داریم و ارزش‌های دینی که داره و ارزشی که به کارگر در اون داده شده.
And I think the best way that we think to combat the capitalist moral system is to go back to our own religious and moral beliefs, which center the worker as the main beneficiary of all of our efforts. Please correct if I said anything incorrectly. That was me, the translator, sorry.
سال بعد صدای منو
الان صداتون رو میشنویم. ببخشید گفتین سوال بعدی؟
آها. آره گفت قسمت دوم سوالاتو. آره.
Matteo, I apologize. Would you please repeat the second part of your question about the oil industry for me?
Yes, it was about how much the sanctions are actually in. If you could elaborate a little bit more on how the sanctions are affecting the oil industry and finding spare parts or the repairing of the oil industry, as we've seen for other countries in the previous hearings. How much this was a major problem, or Iran has found a way to come around this.
میپرسن که آیا میدونین که میخواستم به توضیح بیشتری آیا میتونین ارائه بدین درباره آثار تحریم ها بر صنعت نفت و اینکه ما تو جلسات قبلی برای کشورهای متفاوت شنیدیم که چقدر آثار تحریم ها روی همین موضوعاتی که شما هم فرمودین، از جمله دستگاه هایی که وجود داره، درست کردن دستگاه ها، سرویس هایی که بعد از وارانتی و اینا ارائه میشه، از کشورهای دیگه میدونیم که تاثیر داشته. می‌خواستیم ببینیم شما اطلاعات بیشتری راجع به خصوص نفت و آثار تحریم روی صنعت نفت ایران هم دارین؟
در واقع من میخوام بازش کنم و توضیح بدم به این صورته که دو حالت داره. ما بعضا اون قطعه‌ای که نیاز داریم تکنولوژیشو نداریم و به صورت مجبوریم با طی کردن و رابطه هایی که به وجود میاد و واسطه هایی که به وجود میاد با یه هزینه بالاتری چندین برابر تهیه کنیم و
So I would like to open up this question and answer in two ways. One is because of the lack of technology.
برای تامین متریال
ببخشید. Because of the lack of technology, like some of these parts we would have to produce ourselves, which is like going to be extremely more expensive. ببخشید آقای میرغفاری، تا اونجایی که گفتین خودمون باید پرودوس کنیم و خیلی گرون میشه ترجمه کردم، بقیه‌شو.
و یا اینکه با مهندسی معکوس و تجربه هایی که به دست اومده و شرکت ها و شرکت های دانش بنیانی که شکل گرفته، به مرور زمان با هزینه های زیادی که داده شده خودمون در ساخت تجهیزات توانمند شدیم.
And another way that we in Iran have been able to combat this is that over time, and again, this part is also very costly, is that we were able to over time re-engineer and reproduce some of these equipments ourselves by reverse engineering the material that we had in the past.
این موضوع هم یه دستاوردهایی برای ما داشته، هم یه هزینه هایی رو به وجود آورده. هم هزینه داشته، هم در واقع ضرر داشته.
Obviously this will have both negative and positive effects. بفرمایید. چیزی به اضافه می‌خواید؟
اون معایبش هم که حالا به هر صورت ممکنه بعضی در تولید ما وقفه‌هایی به وجود اومده یا تولیدمون ظرفیت حداکثری نبوده.
Some of the negative effects that this has is that like we are not able to produce as much as we need, and there are a lot of delays in the production of the materials that is needed within the oil refineries.
در خدمتتون هستم، اگر با سوالی هست پاسخ بدم خدمتتون.
I'm present if there are any further questions I can answer. مرسی دکتر، مرسی آقای میرغفاری.
خواهش میکنم، ممنون از شما.
خیلی ممنون همگی. Thank you very much to all of our witnesses and our jurors and our rapporteurs and to the audience that's out there on YouTube. This was a very powerful and moving hearing, but it also had a lot of information and data that can be used effectively in courts. And so we're incredibly grateful to you all. Does somebody want to translate that or very briefly?
ما بی نهایت تشکر می‌کنیم از طرف تیم دادگاه، از همه حضار محترم، از همه شاهدین محترم، از همه قضات که حضور داشتن تا الان با ما، با اینکه خیلی طولانی شده. این جلسه بسیار جلسه قدرتمندی بود و اطلاعات بسیار مفیدی برای استفاده کردن در پرونده هایی که ما خواهیم داشت در آینده به ما کمک خواهند کرد. بی نهایت از همه سپاسگزاریم.
And with that, we will close the hearing. Thank you all very much.
و با این